Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Service Delivery Committee, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Welcome to Leslie Bloomer, committee member, joining us on Teams, and Richard Wetton, who's also joining us on Teams as well. Welcome also to John Joyce, coming from the HMFSI, sitting in for Robert. Thank you. Can we just have there's no other apologies for absence, is there?
The only apology now is Mr. Robert Scott.
Okay, all right. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. Does anybody recognise anything in the proposed agenda that should be taken in private? No. Okay. And does anybody have any declarations of interest pertaining to the agenda? No. If that becomes apparent through the nature of the business, please indicate that and we'll take the appropriate action. That brings us to item 5, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of August. I don't intend to go through them page by page, but does anybody have any comments to make? Just start with the committee members or anybody else, any comments? No. Thank you, Debbie, for a good set of minutes. That takes us neatly on to the action log. Kevin
Murphy, Board Support Manager. Yes, Chair, there is 2 actions on the action log, both of which have been completed. If the committee are content for them to be removed from the action log.
Content, committee members?
Content.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's fine too. And that brings us on to the item 7 and the service delivery update. And over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Stuart Stevens, Interim Deputy Chief Officer. As always, present the highlight report for service delivery for this period. Usual caveat that this covers all elements of service delivery, both training, safety and assurance, and the Service Delivery Directorate. I'll pick out a few specifics, colleagues, and then I'll open up for any questions. My director colleagues could also provide some additional detail if required. Within the report, you'll see the staff and solutions work has progressed well. And the major output from that now is the RDS migration process. And I'm really pleased to say that that has now concluded. And there'll be 36 colleagues from the RDS will migrate into the whole time following a process that was put in place. I think that's a real step forward for the organisation and shows the value that we place for our on-call colleagues. Hopefully it will also have the added benefit of making our on-call more attractive to individuals. We also have to look at that as a pathway, hopefully into the whole time as well. So a real win for the organisation, I think. They also bring a lot of skills, competency and experience, which, given the pension remedy issues that we've faced, is really beneficial for us in terms of balancing our workforce profile. So huge thanks to everybody involved in that and David for his leadership in that group. The staff and solutions team has stood down as a result of the industrial action standing up. It's very much the same people that will be dealing with both issues. So the priority for the organisation now is on industrial action planning, and we'll cover that later on. That's not to say the staff and solution work has stopped. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, but that group, as I said, that was constituted, is no longer meeting. During this period, we also welcome the HMI report into the high-rise, which was presented in October of this year. The team are currently doing the usual gap analysis and action planning on the back of that, and that will come to the next Service Delivery Committee for scrutiny. Very much welcome the report from HMI. I think it was very balanced and fair and has given us some areas for development and continuous improvement, which is always beneficial for these. In terms of prevention and protection, a lot of excellent activity has occurred over this period. Just to highlight a few points, in terms of water safety, a lot of work is going on in terms of water safety. I think it's proven to be beneficial. We've not seen the same levels of tragedy that we saw over previous years this year, and I'm hopeful that as a result of the work that's been going on. The NFCC has recognised the work the service have done on this, and the Prevention and Protection team received an award at the recent NFCC Prevention Awards to recognise that as well. So a national award for that work, which is absolutely so. Just to pass on my congratulations again. Some work's been developed in terms of road safety and the use of VR technology, and again showing the service are looking for innovation and technology to support prevention activity. That's quite a sizable cost of living event was delivered by the service, and a little bit more detail will be provided on that later in the agenda. And the team have been working with partners from Telecare in terms of producing good practice guide for Telecare to allow people who are vulnerable within communities to obviously reside at home safely. In terms of operational activity over the period, the main issue the main point I would pick out from that is Operation London Bridge, following the death of the Queen. The service responded superbly to that event. A lot of planning had been done over the last 8-9 years in order for us to prepare for that, and that plan worked exceptionally well. Whilst I don't always like to pick out individuals, I'd really like to pass on my thanks to Area Commander Matt Acton, who has led this from the word go in terms of the planning for that, and has really good relationships with the Royal Household, etc. During that planning, and the plan, as I say, stood up to quite robust testing. We had a significant involvement over the week that the Queen was in Scotland. As I say, I'd like to commend all those involved. Just to give you a flavour of some of the work that was going on in the background, because it was quite unseen. Every premise in the Royal Mile received a fire safety enforcement audit. Every household in the Royal Mile received a visit from a crew in terms of community safety. We were involved heavily in terms of the convoy arrangements, all the way from Balmoral back to Edinburgh. And obviously a lot of our staff who are based at stations in the area are actually staff at Balmoral as well. So they had quite a personal involvement as well. So just to reaffirm my thanks to all involved, and specifically to Matt for his leadership in terms of the plan. Wider operational activity over the period, again, and it feels like I'm repeating this every meeting now, we saw quite substantial wildfires over that period and substantial flooding. So much more frequent, much more extreme than we've previously seen. And I think that this is an outcome of climate change. I know the committee have put quite a focus on the work that we've done in terms of preparing the organisation for climate change. And I know that obviously the HMI are looking for some other arrangements in terms of that as well, but it's just to reaffirm that it is happening more frequently, it is more extreme. Lots of work ongoing in the background in terms of our wildfire capabilities, and we'll start to see that come through in the next few months. And obviously we've done a lot of work to upgrade our water rescue teams, packages, boat packages, etc. And that's been rolled out as well. So good investment in terms of tackling those specific issues. Just the last couple of points I would highlight is around the PrEP programme, which is the pre-recruitment engagement programme, which is an outcome from the on-call improvement programme that David leads. We're really beginning to see that take a hold now and be highly beneficial. The example provided there is in terms of wires, so 20 out of 21 candidates successful through PrEP into the recruitment process. So the conversion rate now that we're seeing is really, really increasing. Before it was around about 24-25% conversion rate. Now we're getting people attracted to the organisation, and we're developing them and supporting them through the recruitment process, and that's transpiring that they're actually coming through. So we're hopeful that we start to see this extrapolate across Scotland, that starts to really support and tackle the recruitment issues we've had with our on-call staff. And the last point I would just to note, Stuart Nicholson obviously provided an update at a previous meeting around about Knoll, and it was really good to see that SFRS hosted the latest Knoll event here and provided an input into Albert Drive incident, which was really well received by colleagues from Knoll, and just reaffirms our commitment to being a learning organisation and supporting and developing our workforce. Chair, I'll pause at that and happy to open up for any questions or bring in my director colleagues if there's any other points.
Thanks for that, Stuart. Just before I open it up to colleagues, I just want to record our thanks also for everybody that was involved with the Up London Bridge work. Excellent. That was not an insignificant event by any stretch of the imagination. So that all went extremely well. And also we noted that I might have missed it in the update, but the award for the water work with the NFCC. Excellent. Really good. So thank you. Colleagues, anything to bring up from there?
I had a very, very useful briefing from your fire safety engineering team, the station officer and sorry, that's the wrong phrase now, station manager, and the three operatives, the three people who are working it. Couple of points, if I might. I was very impressed by them. Their competence and their commitment was very apparent. We had a very honest discussion for an hour and a half about some of the challenges they faced. And two things I just wanted to highlight, and I'm really not trying to sort of get deeply involved, but it struck me that they have recruitment problems. And particularly when they have to recruit, as I understand it, internally first, and they can't recruit externally first. I'm not saying that should necessarily change. I'm just highlighting that as an issue which you're probably aware of, which would be good to be examined. And the other thing that struck me quite clearly was the need that the memorandum of agreement between SFRS and what is probably called labs, which is probably needs to be revisited to ensure that our staff are not being asked to do things which really may interest them but are not what they have to do. And when you're running short-staffed, you want to be that. So those were 2 points, but overall I was grateful for those who facilitated it, and I thought it reflected well on the organisation.
Excellent. Thank you for that update.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Anybody else? And I think to ask Tim.
Very quick one. Tim Wright, board member and the committee member. We spoke at the last meeting. We talked for quite a while about the GTAC tablets, and I saw a comment on page 17 that there's an alternative solution being progressed by ICT to address some of those. Just wondered what that might be. Pencil and paper, perhaps, or.
Jonah?
Yeah, David Farris, Director of Service Delivery. Yes, there's alternatives being put forward by LACT function, the new emergency services network, and some of the devices that are being purchased for that, and looking at how the documents and the other applications that are required on our appliances could be displayed differently using a different operating system, different software on the new tablet. So it would be a combination of all the different devices that are available to us, but taking on that effectively that new technology earlier. And I think we've had updates on the Ministry Service Network before and trying to front load that data element, so it ties into having the ability to use the operating software for that device, which would accommodate, I believe, not being too technically minded, we should accommodate what we need in terms of the PDF reader and other applications.
Good to hear that, you know, these things are not just left as barriers, that you're working to try and find resolutions. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, we've looked at a number of potential solutions to that issue over the time.
And do we have any idea of timescales?
I'd have to refer back to ICT colleagues because it is tied into the different tablet that's becoming available.
Okay.
There is an interim solution being developed in terms of, I think what became clear at the last Service Delivery Committee meeting was the current GTAC tablets will never be capable of doing, because of security issues, what we'd like them to do. So ICT are working up a temporary solution in terms of standalone tablets that will be brought in the service. I think the procurement looks like it's going to be around about the end of March to start to bring those in. So they'll start to be rolled out across appliances. And then obviously that longer term solution that David talked about in terms of ESN Connect is the answer to resolving it.
I'm just conscious of not getting into too much detail about a subject that we've only just looked at on that, but I'd like to have one more follow-up question. That would be, would any system of any emergency services be plagued by the issue of linking in to a highly secure network and then also needing to be doing software updates and information updates into that environment? You know, this isn't in other organizations I've been with, similar issues have occurred when you're trying to link in updates and information into it, but whilst also being able to link into the any form of emergency service network? Or is that merely a question that in due course ICT will answer?
I mean, my understanding is that is the development around about the emergency services network, the SMCP work, is that it is more secure in terms of those updates, and that's why the data transfer for that is in a format which is more preferable and more secure. That's my basic understanding, that we would eradicate some of the current challenges that we face by introducing that at that point. And it is about expediting the elements of that we can bring forward for data transfer.
Okay, I think it's a bit unfair to ask that detail of question at the moment, as I say, particularly because we had the GSEC paper last time. But I think it's something that perhaps, Stuart, you and I should talk about on the sidelines when we have our catch up, because it may well be that we bring a paper back to that in due course. But we'll perhaps say about that. Okay. Angelina.
Thank you. Angelina Foster, board member and member of this committee. Stuart, I think you said that we would get some more information on the cost of living event later, and I think I can see the item where that will happen. So you might want to sit on this until then, but it's clear to me from this package of papers and this report in particular that the shadow of the cost of living is becoming a darker one and a more apparent one throughout a number of areas. And in this paper in particular, I get the sense that our local teams, of course, are naturally, almost intuitively ramping up some of their activities in response to that, as well as presumably the online event that's mentioned is more of a central response. But I suppose my question becomes one of, to what extent organisationally are we responding in that kind of incremental way, or is it something that we are taking as a recognised, fresh strategic hit? For example, around the SLT table, and are we looking at service delivery with that in mind? You see what I'm trying to ask, or are we just kind of rolling with the punches as it's getting worse for people? So it's not a massively focused question, I'm sorry, but I'm just very conscious that it's a strong thread through a number of things today.
I'll perhaps give just a kind of general SLT view and then bring David in terms of the dimension he's provided in terms of service delivery, but absolutely in terms of the focus of SLT and the cost of living crisis thing, would agree that we are all focused on that. Because it's wider than just a preventive messaging, because there's elements around how it affects our own staff.
People, yeah. My
biggest concern, and I think I've said it to the service delivery committee before, is how that translates into operational demand. I still believe it will translate into operational demand. I've raised it at the Strategic Resilience Partnership with the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. We're raising it through Scottish Government frequently and things like that. So there is a real strategic focus on it, Angelina, because it is a significant risk.
Grant. Thank you.
David, I don't know if there's anything from a service delivery perspective.
To be honest, I don't have a great deal to add to that, Dave. I think from a strategic perspective, it's an umbrella term, isn't it? Cost of living crisis and everything that, we're understanding all the component parts of that. And I think, as you said, that there's an intuitive response happening in local service delivery, which I think is absolutely appropriate and would be the case for any emerging trend that we would see, cost of living or otherwise. And I think that continues. I think Stuart mentioned the direction I've given. It is about being aware, and we've had that with the local service delivery areas and the DACOs, particularly in our kind of performance management meetings, and potentially moving the focus. But I think when we look at we'll go into more detail when we cover the risk spotlight, but there are very specific elements that have been picked up, and it's about making those linkages, I think. So I think I'm certainly comfortable from a service delivery perspective. We are aware and in tune.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, and I think, as you both say, we'll have more discussion around that on item 11.2. Leslie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Leslie Bloomer, a board member and member of this committee. Much to welcome, Stuart, and I think the movement of 36 from on-call to whole-time firefighters is absolutely fantastic. What a brilliant result. And I also noted the revision to the driver training, and if I've understood that correctly, that allows us to really significantly increase throughput. And I also wanted to say good on the people in Angus for the work in the food bank and the winter clothing. My particular question is in relation to the Safe and Well pilot, and the paper notes that the pilot has been completed and evaluated, and I just wondered where, if and where board members might be cited in that evaluation. Will we get a chance to have a discussion about it? Thank you.
Yeah. So the evaluation, because it's a major project, the evaluation for Safe and Well will go through the change committee. Leslie, it came to SMB a couple of weeks ago, and I've asked for some amendments to be made to it, and some improvements around the benefits realisation, etc. So that'll come through the change committee, and February, I think it is the next change committee, Leslie. But clearly there's parallels with this committee as well, so we'll clearly go feedback to this committee as well.
That's great, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm just like to ask a quick question. Excuse me, sorry. Glasgow School of Art. This work will acknowledge the human and organisational behaviour elements that have been recently highlighted as an area where the service can improve processes and investigative practices. Does that result in an action plan that you then pursue, and how does that manifest itself and is managed within the service?
So, there is an action plan for learning from the Glasgow School of Art that emanated from the fire investigation report. We were contacted by an eminent professional who was the lead for the Piper Alpha incident, and really focuses on human behaviour. And it's not an element of a fire investigation that we're particularly focused on. We look at the causation factors and that, but we don't particularly drill into the human factors, and we can apply that across all parts of accidents across the organisation. So that individual's kindly provided some support to a fire investigation team, and it crosses into fire engineering as well. So they're working for them to develop that and develop a package on how we can start to look at those elements as well. So that's where that emanates from.
And so where would that action plan be managed?
Within prevention and protection.
And then managed up into what, senior management board or
it'd be up to David in terms of taking that forward. You know, if there's organisational learning that comes from that, then we'd obviously tie with training safety assurance around how we'd start to roll that out across the organisation and things like that as well. But it's very specific to human behaviours in terms of, I can't remember the terminology is in terms of what health and safety use, but health and safety practitioners are involved in it as well. So I can't remember what was the term they use for it.
That's fine. That's fine. I was interested to see, because the service is particularly well structured around reports and comments about ways of improvement, and in my humble opinion, it does it very well. And I just wanted to know what was happening with that particular aspect.
So as I say, it's a development tool that's been used for our fire investigation teams and our health and safety officers as well, things like that. So I don't know if it'll come up through the organisation, or it'll just naturally go through training in terms of how we roll that out to specific individuals.
Okay.
So I don't know.
I would imagine that certainly in terms of when we get the learning from it, it'll find its way through the National Safety and Assurance Board as well, as new information tends to do around about that. So whether it's governed through an action plan, or whether it's just operational learning that would come in through that route,
okay,
it won't be missed.
Right, thank you very much. I'm slightly hesitating because we have a 30-minute or 40-minute window to pull in Ali Perry and Kathy Barlow to talk about the home fire safety visits, and that window starts at about 25 to 11. Could we jump now? No, sorry, has everybody finished with the service delivery update report? Yes, okay. Could we just juggle the agenda slightly and jump to 8.3 and David Farres on the UFAS preparing for implementation work group, please, which should be a short-ish paper. And David, if we could be finished in about 10 minutes and colleagues in 10 minutes, that would be excellent in terms of time. I perhaps should have been a bit more helpful and given you a bit of advance warning on that. I'll carry on. I'll carry on talking for a moment until you get your paper.
I think we're getting Gordon's pride in for this paper.
Ah, sorry. That's me. That's me thinking that.
If I can find it. Nobody mentioned the elephant in the report. The elephant house fire. I'm assuming that was an incident, was it?
I can talk. We can talk about that.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one.
David and I were both in attendance at that, so David was in charge. I just went to annoy David, so under the guise of mentoring and support. So.
Yeah, and because an elephant was involved.
Absolutely.
UFAS. Are you okay, David? I'm sorry about that.
Still trying to find it.
Oh, apologies.
It's hard, probably.
If you find the page number, tell me what it is.
See, this is the problem when you don't have an electronic version of it.
72
72.
of the whole comic here.
Yes, so I have it, Chair.
Okay.
As a standing agenda item, over the last number of service committees, obviously we've had an update on UFAS implementation working group and the work plan update. The work plan update is included at Appendix A, but I'm just going to bring in Gordon to give the update in terms of the implementation plan. Gordon.
Welcome, Gordon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. As the Service Delivery Committee are aware, the full delivery of the UFAS project is linked with other SFRS projects, as is covered in section 3.3 of the paper. Since there may be doubt with the delivery date of some of the linked projects, the UFAS projects are investigating alternative delivery models and methods. And that's captured with an amendment to the work plan, which is an appendix of this paper. This allows, or this will ensure that we have, as promised, a 6-month communication plan with time to program that fully, and that's section 3 of the appendix. And then finally, the committee will note in section 3.4 and onwards that the project team are investigating alternative delivery methods, stroke models that may release some of the project benefits, but that remains work ongoing. And that's the summary, Chair.
Okay, thank you. First of all, do colleagues have anything to ask about this? Tim first, and Paul.
I had two things. One was the point being made of decoupling this from being tied to CCF. I was interested in just how that decoupling is happening, because I think that's an interesting development, because we've known that there's been a strong dependency between the two. The other one was just a sort of passing mention on page 75 of the legal advice, or the advice has been to move away from legal agreements to operating principles instead. Anybody, as soon as I hear moving away from legal agreements to operate, I just wonder, was there some suggestion of exposure for the service if we had a legal agreement in place? Is it a risk that we ought to be aware of? So they were just the 2 points that I was interested in getting a little bit more detail on.
Yeah. I'll pick up on the first point, and we'll allow Gordon to prepare his response for the second question. Yeah, in terms of that decoupling and the clear dependency between CCF, I think that's been really clear since we started discussing this and around about the mobilisation methodology and the ability to update the system and the changes to the UFAS deployment. And that's currently the bit that we're challenged with in terms of that timescale. So under 3.4, it really is just about how we can try to continue to do something albeit it won't be the complete package at this moment in time, because in terms of the timescales that we had given, that's clearly lagging at the moment. So it is about exploring ways that that could be done. Now, we understand that there's going to be challenges there around about our operations control room and other elements of that. Any change involves a degree of training, and we would have liked to have done that as part of the training package for CCF, but of course we aren't at that stage. So it's really just about what we can do until such times as we meet the timescales for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Would you like me to pick up on the second section now?
Yes, my apologies.
No problem. I suppose the key piece, just leading on from where David left that conversation, as we move away from the preferred full delivery model, we are looking at those alternative delivery models that we've spoken around. Anything that we do, we will make sure it is fully checked through governance. We have links with our legal team supporting the project, so we'll make sure everything is aligned and double checked to make sure that any risk is fully understood and fully clarified, to make sure we know that if there is a change to any risk from the progression of any alternative models, that we truly understand what that risk is and the details, and that our strategic leaders and board are fully sighted on those risks, just to make that informed decision.
Gordon, did you pick up on the element around about the action plan and the legal advice?
It's in relation to the alarm receiving centres, the connection or agreements with them, and moving away from what I would describe originally, I think, as legal agreements with them, into adopting and operating principles instead.
I can't actually find that in my notes, I'm afraid, but what I can do is, again, offer that reassurance. One of our work plan is to fully engage with our, I think it's section 6, fully engage with our ACTs, make sure all those processes are in place, make sure if there is any changes that are required to move away, and what changes that are required to move away from any legal agreements are, we're fully cited them, we fully understand them, and our partners are engaged with fully as well. There are a number of partners that will have legal agreements in place with these acts, and that will be part of the consultation and communication piece that we will deliver in that 6-month run up, just to make sure all elements are investigated and checked. Sorry, does that answer the question? I'm not 100% sure.
It does, in as much as I'm not expecting us to get into the legal niceties. It's just whether if the alarm receiving centres, who are third parties, and if they have agreements with their clients, whether our changes to INFAS make any difference in terms of our liability as a service. And are they going to come after us, basically? And I'm just interested that we're moving away from a legal agreement with them to adopting operating principles instead. So that's all.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think we spoke about that. I recall at our last meeting in Dundee, we spoke about this topic in terms of, I think, getting the ARCs even on board in terms of the journey towards changing the model, and their reluctance to engage. Really, I'm choosing my words, Paul. The reluctance to get involved on the journey that we're trying to take in terms of youth tax reduction. So I think it's my interpretation, and we will go away and do a little bit more work around about what the actual implications of that are, is that it's trying to get us into a position where we have a set of principles that we understand what we're trying to achieve. Everybody else in terms of the receiving side understands what we're trying to achieve, but we might not have the legal leverage to progress that.
Okay,
is my understanding.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the weeds on it. I just want to understand it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Paul.
Obviously, it's got to be delayed. That's that question. My eyesight isn't good enough to read Appendix A.
So hard.
That's impossible. So partly this is just a simple question for me to help me. Is it possible to implement this in phases? Does it have to be an all-in-one go sweep, or can we do it in phases? And is there actually some potential assistance to us in reducing the number of calls coming into the operation control centres if we can do phases, which improves our resilience?
Yes, in short, the answer is yes, and that's what we're looking at in terms of those options under section 3.4 of the report into you know what can possibly be done, because I think a phased approach, which would start to get us towards the ultimate goal, is what's required here, and overcoming some of the technological challenges and doing so. So again, that's probably why I referred to the element of training around about OC staff and different elements of that.
Totally understand, but assuming we are we are going to do this. So in terms of public presentation of this and getting building owners aware that this is happening, surely we can begin some of the communications and reasoning earlier.
And that's already
and that's in there as well.
Yeah, that's already in train. Right. And
I didn't really doubt that you had this under control, but I just wanted to, I think sometimes those sort of simple things could go into the main report rather than an annex, which is so complex that I can't follow it.
The literature is available. Some of the work that's being done in terms of leaving the duty holders at premises where we're attending just now to inform them of the changes. Right. That's all in train. Clearly, what's been missing is the actual go live launch date, and we've not been able to tell duty holders that particular element. And in terms of that education, it's already happening. Yes.
So they should still prepare themselves.
And we should plan. Thank you.
Go live, but it'll come down to two things: how robustly we call challenge, and the point I've just been around about ARCs, how much the ARCs start to filter calls coming through to us, because the default position is just to put them through to us. If they stop doing that, we'll see a sizable drop off in the number of calls coming through, and that'll maximise the benefits we intend to get through this change.
I've never underestimated the problem in you having dealing with the ARCs. Making money out.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul. Stuart, is this something that we've got an item later, items for consideration of future IDF board strategy information days? I feel that we've had extensive board briefings of the UFAS work. Is this something that we feel now really should be coming back to the board in a more structured way, other than my verbal update for the service delivery business?
So just to say, so the next, there's a paper coming to SLT on I'm going to say the 9th of December, and shortly after that there'll be another paper coming to the board to update the board on the terms of the position of that
in hand.
Indeed, and seek some board support in terms of the mitigations we might put in place if we can't achieve the full.
I think that would be,
because it was a board decision. Options we've chosen, so it's right that we go back to the board, right, that and seek that level of governance through that methodology.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions about the UFAS work? Okay, thank you. Stuart, we've got a decision to make here. Looking at Ali and Kathy on fire safety visits. Should we just move on with the agenda and skip over the home fire safety visits as we go forward, because they've obviously not appeared?
Just seeing if they're dialing just now.
We can dial them in.
Well, they may not. I'll tell you what I'd like to do. I think we probably have we've already missed the beginning of the window now, and it was only a tight window for the home fire safety visits, and it'll be a fairly meaty discussion. There were two windows. The next window was around midday, wasn't it? So let's go for that now, and we'll carry on with the agenda if everybody's happy with that. Okay. Yeah, would you take that? Thanks. No, I think I'll stick with the plan because we've only got 20 minutes just left. And I'll just check one thing. Ali, and is that Kathy that's joined?
I've joined, and that's Kathy. Yeah.
Ali, is your next appointment at 11 o'clock?
Yes.
In that case, then, Ali, I'm going to defer the home fire safety visit till the 12 o'clock slot.
Okay, no problem.
Because I don't think 20 minutes is enough to really give us the conversation that we want.
Okay, Chair.
Is that okay? Right.
Of course.
So let's move then. Let me just make sure I'm jumping around this in a comprehensive way. So let's now come back into the item 8.1 and the QPR report for Q2. Who's going to pick up with that, David?
Pick that up, Chair. Yeah, so just in terms of I'm going to bring obviously Chris Fitzpatrick in just very, very shortly to cover off some particular elements of the performance report. But this report covers the period of Q2 2023. In the cover paper, you can see that under section 3.1, we have a point towards a discussion that we had at the last Service Delivery Committee that says 6 KPI targets achieved. However, green but likely to change due to inaccurate data. And we might pick that up as we come through Chris's presentation on the actual report. And you will recall that we had previous discussions around about data collection, incident recording, and we have continued on some actions to address elements of that, and we may pick that up in response to this particular paper. In terms of the home fire safety visits under section 3.5, Chris is going to pick up specifically on that area, and I think that might be quite useful in terms of setting a context for what we're going to talk about afterwards. And I would like to pick up, in conjunction with Chris, a little bit of a conversation on 3.7, which refers to our retained availability and the whole time availability and the relationship between those two. But we'll develop that as a point when we come to that within the performance report. So I'll just pass over to Chris now, if you're available, Chris.
Yes, thanks, David. Good morning, all. It's Chris Fitzpatrick, Business Intelligence and Data Services Manager. I'm keeping my camera off just to try and save on bandwidth, so hopefully it doesn't affect the presentation. You should be able to see the performance report on your screens. If there's any issues, please just call out. So as per previous meetings, I'll just cover the salient points on the quarter's performance, and happy to take any questions at the end with David. So I spoke on Thursday at the board strategy day about the time we have to prepare reports for boards and committees, meaning that the reports provided take the form of descriptive analytics, effectively telling us what we've seen from past activity. And from that point, we submit those. We have an opportunity to provide a more diagnostic view of our performance by looking at what drives the performance quarter on quarter. So some of what I wanted to go over with you today gives you evidence of that, but it's limited again to the data that we can access and scrutinise thereafter. So I will begin with a brief summary of operational demand and highlight some insights we can take from that summary. So this page in the report shows that operational demand for year to date is just under 53,000 incidents, and that's the highest half-year activity over the last 10 years. You'll notice from the two pie charts on the right-hand side that fires are 1/3 of all activity, special services just under 15%, false alarms more than 53%. If I hover over the false alarm segment, it shows me that UFAS makes up 54% of all false alarms. Similarly, with special services, effect and entry exit is 1/3 of all special service. And in terms of fires, outdoor fires and refuse fires make up 2/3 of all fires attended. In terms of fire motive, almost 2/3 are deliberate in nature, 1/3 accidental. And again, if I hover over deliberate, we can see that outdoor fires and refuse fires are 84% of all deliberate fires. On the left-hand side under activity by hours a day, if I select the 4 busiest hours of the day, we can see that that accounts for just over 14,000 incidents for the year so far, which is about 27% of activity. The pie charts on the right-hand side now reflect that 4-hour period. So we can see that fires across that period account for 46% roughly, False alarms drops to 42 and special service 11%. And below, incidents deliberate in nature increases to 70%. The bottom two charts highlight the casualties involved in incidents over that period. So on the left-hand side, we've got fire-related casualties, and on the right, we have special service casualties. Now, these are predominantly related to RTCs, but they actually peak in the daytime hours between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. and then gradually decline until 8 p.m, where we see fewer numbers until kind of commuting hours the next day. If I hover over the 3 p.m. on the casualties, you'll see that 72 of the 95 casualties reported 3 till 4 are from RTCs. Same looking at fires, just to give an explanation on what's been displayed. You'll notice that the figures in the table, when I hover over the column that says 13, actually says 19. The difference there is that there were 19 casualties reported from fires, but only 13 of those were fire-related casualties. So hopefully that makes sense. Moving on to the Service Delivery Committee summary page. We've got 4 indicators that are shown as green, but again, as David had mentioned, there's a couple of these around casualties. With the information we know just now, potential concerns around the quality of that information is being worked on between my team and service delivery to try and improve on that. So it's possible that if we improve on the information that's in IRS over the course of the year, that those indicators could go from green to amber or potentially red. The indicators are shown as red, most marginally missed target, with the exception of fires from refuse and vehicle fires, and also the home fire safety visits. But we're just about to come on to that in the next page and give some insight to why that was. So on the next page, you can see that the indicators for home fire safety visits overall and those for high risk missed target. And I will take you into a bit of further analysis that we've conducted on that. So this page is showing you that all home fire safety visits that have been conducted and the method in which they were referred to the organisation. So we have 4 methods here showing partner referrals, self-referrals, PDIR and direct targeting. So partner referrals were fairly consistent pre-pandemic, and obviously they dropped off. The numbers that have come back since are still below, other than the north, because the north does look in the last few years as if it's the same level as before the pandemic. However, the east and the west are slightly down. Self-referrals did recover last year, but after Q4, they've dropped significantly to similar levels that we'd seen during the pandemic. PDIR referrals have increased quarter on quarter since pandemic, but direct targeting referrals had been fairly consistent up to the pandemic. They dropped off to quite low levels, and that's not really changed. Now we do know a bit more information on that, and this was something that was driven, I believe, by legacy practices, but it dropped off at the beginning of the pandemic, and they've not been reenacted. So we've seen low numbers across every quarter since that period.
Chris, maybe I'll just cut in there, Chris, just to put a little bit of context
Sure.
around that particular comment. So, yes, direct targeting, and you'll see the drop off in terms of the referrals across direct targeting. Direct targeting is also known as cold calling, and we have intentionally moved away from the practice of cold calling to a more focused approach to vulnerabilities and who we're visiting in terms of those referral pathways. So you would have seen legacy practices, as Chris referred to, of a fire engine going out into an area and knocking doors effectively. And we've moved away from that, so that so you can see that's tailed off.
Oh, okay, that's a useful explanation, particularly of that that bottom, the bottom right hand.
Yes, that's the one.
Referring to.
Sorry, can I just check my understanding of that?
Yep.
So are you saying that's a deliberate decision in effect? So that's not a failure to pick up again, but it's a conscious
Absolutely. The pandemic.
move away from that approach?
The pandemic
Okay.
brought a halt to that, and we've specifically looked not to reinstate that.
Okay.
We've tried to educate around about that type of activity. It comes into the trying to achieve numbers versus quality. We might get into talk about in terms of the next paper.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you for that clarification, David. You finished?
Yes.
Chris.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, happy to carry on.
Sorry, Chris, sorry to interrupt. Leslie just would like to ask a quick supplementary question.
Thank you. Yes, Chris, it was on the last set of 4 graphs, please. If you're able to go back. Can I just check, Davy, I'm assuming that the direct targeting was stopped because we weren't getting into the houses. Was that right? Or why?
Yeah, our approach to home fire safety visits per se changed at the start of the pandemic, and we brought out the guidance on that. And as Angelina's kind of pointed out there, it was a conscious decision not to return to that methodology.
And just I'm wanting to confirm, because that methodology was not proving effective. Is that right?
It's not as targeted. It's left to chance effectively.
We want to deliver, whilst it's a universal programme as things stand, we want to deliver it where it'll have the maximum benefit. The maximum benefit is for partner with agencies to identify the most vulnerable, or us through our campaigns to encourage the most vulnerable to come forward for a home fire safety visit. Direct targeting is a bit of a broad brush, and you could, it's a bit potluck. If you go to the right door, you might get the right person. Now, the work that's been done on CRIM and the mapping technology that's within that looks at all the societal factors and the health factors will give us a really robust tool that we could probably do direct target in the future, because we'll know the right places to go to, because that'll tell us. So, but before it was a little bit uninformed in terms of that direct targeting. So it was a means to end of getting numbers, if I'm being completely honest with you, Leslie, and to the detriment of quality, I would suggest.
Brilliant, Stuart. Exactly what was in my mind with the CRIM and all the data. Now we could actually directly target the streets where nearly everybody is going to be going to benefit by being medium or high risk category. But we'll pick it up more at the next paper. But thanks, Stuart. That's exactly what I was getting at. And thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
So the next piece I was going to talk about on here is in relation to UFAS. So we were 1% off target, but just again to give some assurances on what's happening here just now is we have seen a kind of gradual increase since pandemic in terms of the number of UFAS, and that would have been expected. But the blue line above, so the black line is incident activity, the blue line is blue light journeys. So you can see since 2021 Q1, there's been a closer relationship between the incidents and blue light journeys, effectively fewer vehicles going out to these incidents. So just now in Q2, for every UFAS incident that we attended, the average is 1.5 appliances per incident. The table below gives a breakdown of some of the causes of UFAS. So what we've seen is UFAS caused by contaminants, humans, and those of a malicious nature increase again following the pandemic. So the middle column highlighting a number of values is the full year of the pandemic, and then highlighted this current year. So you can see that return to previous figures. But something that sits within there that David and I were just talking about yesterday again is potentially another data quality concern that we'll pick up with service delivery, and it's the increase in recording unknown under apparatus. So it was the one that didn't really drop off at the pandemic. You can see that row where 2018-19 value is 876 up to 1,092 and 1,051 that year. But the issue for us just now is we're seeing 1,553 UFAS recorded. So that's like a 50% increase on the year of the pandemic when false alarm numbers had fallen. There is a possibility, if we look at the contaminants line, that we're still substantially below the number of UFAS caused by contaminants from the year prior to the pandemic. So possibly for some reason, what is being recorded as unknown should actually be recorded as contaminants, but that'll take a level of investigation by my team and also service delivery.
Can I make a point on that, Chris?
You can, sure, please.
Would the unknown be an outcome of the change to how we respond to UFAS, and we don't necessarily always access the premise or the premises, sorry. So it is unknown because they can't actually identify what the trigger for the call would be. So it's probably or potentially a good indicator of the fact that our UFAS policy is working in terms of crews don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time there. They can just go, no sign of fire, and leave. So maybe just worthwhile maybe digging into that a little bit.
No, certainly, because again, with the discussions we have with David and colleagues at Service Delivery, we'll need to investigate all avenues, so it's useful to know.
And in conjunction with that, it would be interesting to see why there's the reduction in contaminants as well. So, you know, it's both of those elements.
They could go hand in hand, that couldn't they?
Yeah.
Okay, Chris.
Carry on.
Contaminants are showing what?
So the next page, I was just going to go on to fire fatalities, fire casualties. So fire fatalities is off by 1.9%. It's effectively the difference between one fatality this year and in 2019-20 we had recorded 14. Fire fatalities for Q1 and 2. What we have seen is a shift where there have been more female fatalities reported, and the last time that had happened was back in 2017-18 at this point. The fire casualties image in the bottom left hand side just shows the overall decline in casualty numbers, but we do still see higher male casualty rate than female. The tables on the right hand side again just point to some areas of concern around the data. We are working again with service delivery and specifically fire investigation on this front because of the numbers that we've got still sitting in our IRS system is not known. Now, historically, what would happen is fire investigation concludes a report and known factors are then updated within the fire report and on the IRS system. And we're seeing that in the last couple of years that's increased, whereby those practices haven't actually taken effect. So we have to rectify that. The table below that again gives us some indication as to what we think we have to address around data quality concerns, where the casualty, the type of casualty that's dropped significantly is those stated as overcome by gas, smoke or toxic fumes or asphyxiation. So potentially it's to do with our handling of casualties across the pandemic and since, and how crews determine they should be recording that in IRS. So again, it's just a point to mention. It is something that we're investigating. There's not much more we can say around it at this stage. Just coming back, so the last one on this page was just around deliberate primary fires. So it's really just to point out the last 2 quarters are higher activity than we have seen historically. Normally the peak is the Q1 column, as you can see, and then there's a drop off in the Q2 column. But this year Q2 has exceeded Q1, and partly I think it will touch on the point made by the DEP earlier on and the types of fires that we're seeing. But we can look at the profile as well as to when we typically see these. So there's a peak round about 8 o'clock in the evening, and it does change with property type. So if we look specifically at building fires, we see the dip through the course of the day. There's an increase about 8 o'clock. It's more significant when we're looking at outdoor fires. But the interesting one is in terms of vehicles, where it's actually between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning we see these. And there's a slight change when we look at it from a service delivery perspective. Numbers are a bit higher in the east than they are in the west, so that there's a flatter peak for activity in the west. East is a bit more predominant. And just come to the next page. So there's no deeper analysis at this point on outcome 2. We have seen low and medium continue for accidental dwelling fires and achieving target. Still a slightly off target for high severity, but that's more to do with the target that's set. The actual activity itself doesn't give us any cause for concern, as in there's no increase, but we're just not achieving the target that was set of reducing the 5% on the 3-year average. No issue with call handling times. No change in the kind of profile of the top 10 incident types. And probably the key ones on here are in relation to availability, and this takes us on to what David had wanted to talk about. So you can see just now that for Q2 we've reported 71% availability for RDS. David, do you want to pick it up at this point?
Yeah, no, that would be useful. I think committee members will be aware that we come under significant pressure at local scrutiny across the country around about our availability, particularly of our on-call. So in remote and rural areas, local councillors, local scrutiny committees, and local news outlets and media. And we saw a recent case in STV reporting in the Highland area around about lack of fire cover and availability. And I just wanted to put a little bit of context around about something that I feel is maybe a bit of an anomaly in terms of the way that we record our on-call availability versus our whole-time availability. So when you see the figures that we've taken overall in terms of the report at 92% for the period for whole-time availability and 71% retained availability, we need to understand that the whole-time availability is based on the number of appliances, and the on-call availability is based on the number of stations. And this becomes a problem to us in rural areas because we could report a 50%, and I'll illustrate it to you shortly, but we could report on 50% availability for a fire station, which actually has a fire engine available 100% of the time. And that's because it's aggregated between the two appliances that would sit in that fire station. So the first appliance could be available, and is often the case, and the second appliance could have low availability, but because we aggregate and then average, it shows a lower availability level. So I'm currently working with Chris and our service delivery teams to try and finesse the way that we do that, because I think we need to get to a place that's far more accurate. Because a recent example in Wick and Thurso, that was highlighted on the news, it was very clear that actually we did have fire cover in excess of 90% of the time, but it was only with one appliance in each of those times as opposed to the two appliances. So it's more about the recording and the understanding of how we're doing that rather than the reality of the situation. My eyes aren't that great, but I think Chris is putting up some details around about a very similar situation in the East SDA.
But sorry, Dave, I brought the wrong one up, but I'll bring up the St Andrews Cooper. But I've got the Thurso Wick one there to show as well. So this is St Andrews Cooper. So can people see this clearly on screen, or is it quite small?
I can't.
It would benefit from a verbal narrative as well.
Sure. Sure, no bother. Okay, so what we're seeing on the left, the top left-hand table, the first row highlighted is St Andrews Station. So it's showing total availability for St Andrews Station as 79%. The day availability is 62% and evening is 94%. Weekend is 79%. The row directly below St Andrews relates to their first appliance, November 24 Papa 6. Now, total availability for that appliance is 97.8%. Day availability is 96.3%. Evening is 99.2% and weekend is 97.8%. Now, the reason the station availability has been dragged down is because of the second pump's availability, which total is 60.2%, and then day is 27.7%, evenings 88.9%, weekend 60.5%. The second highlighted row is Cooper, and it's exactly the same thing I'm going to tell you. The station availability figure is 83.2% total. For the first appliance, it's 95.5%, but the second appliance is 71%. There is another example at the bottom, which was really just to show if we were measuring this based on the first appliance, then St Andrews' overall availability would have been 97.8% and Cooper's would have been 95.5%. If you can't see it clearly, it's probably not going to be that great, but as David had mentioned, Thurso was the one that had made the news. Thurso's overall availability is down at 56.4%. However, the first appliance has a availability of 92.3% and the second appliance is 20.5%. Does anyone have any questions on the numbers or the way in which?
Yes, they do, Chris, as you might expect. I'll just start with Leslie for a second.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. And having this live demonstration of what you can do is absolutely amazing. It's brilliant. My question really is about what is the right indicator for an effective response? So if one appliance can provide an effective response, then that we might be better going to that. But if it requires two appliances to provide an effective response, then we might have a PI that relates to that. But then presumably two appliances would come from different stations potentially a lot of the time. So I'm just wondering about what is the best measure for an effective response. But actually, I think what I'm coming to is that the best measure of how effective we are at responding is response time, but that doesn't help councillors in rural areas when there's only 5 incidents a year. I don't know, just some thoughts and welcome views on them. Thanks.
I understand where you're coming from, David. I don't know if you want to comment on this first before I do, or?
Yeah, I think we'll just let David come in, and then Chris, if you want to add anything, by all means, and then I'll come on to Paul about the same subject.
Thanks, Richard. I think that's it. I understand the line there, Leslie, but I think it's a very difficult variable in terms of effectiveness because it's based on incident type and it's based on predetermined attendances. So I think, and my perception would be that a community would be reassured if they had a fire engine. And in these cases, they do have a fire engine. However, it's been reported because through freedom of information, we've been asked for our overall availability and it's skewing those figures. So I think it would be very difficult to indicate a performance measure around about the unknown elements of incident type, because that's the only way you can correlate with effectiveness. Does that help?
No, it absolutely helps, and I do apologise about my chesty cough thing.
Could I come back in on that, please, Nick?
Yes, go on, Leslie. I'd like to say something then, Paul.
Okay, so David, what you're saying is that if we believe communities are reassured with one fire appliance, and that would be borne out by the fact that most of the calls are UFAS or a refuse fires incidents that one appliance can deal with, then I would support moving the indicator to availability of first appliance. Now, that's just hearing about it and clearly more thought, but I think the key point is, will they be reassured with one appliance? And if the answer is yes, and it makes sense for them to be reassured by yes, then let's change the PI. Thanks.
And in future, and clearly with the work that's ongoing around about CRIM and other pieces of information, we need to, I suppose, remember that some of the stations in question here historically have had 2 appliances or a second appliance introduced for a reason in the midst of time somewhere, and we need to understand whether it's still appropriate to have 2 appliances, because we could resolve all those availability issues by not having a second appliance in the station, because we've got sufficient crew to crew the first appliance all the time, it would appear. And it's the second appliance that with those extra numbers that just can't make it quite as often.
My only comment would be to all that would be, whatever the end result of it all, I think it has to be directly comparable between whole time stations and on-call stations, and therefore, you know, it has to be meaningful to apples and apples and that sort of comment. But I'll just come on to Paul before we just check with Chris whether or not there's anything further he wants to say. And Leslie, is your hand up again for another question? No. Okay, Paul.
I think it's all. Sorry, first of all, I'm very glad we have this data. I think that's really impressive, and the data is necessary for us as a committee and for the service to be able to have. However, I think that's a different thing from what we present publicly. Yes, if there's an FOI, you've got to provide it, but we need to be presenting this in a way that reflects the actual need of the community and the way we are responding to them. And I would hope that we would have lines available and press response, so that if there is an article in the First of Advertiser or whatever, we have a response back which makes 2 points. 1, 99% of the time you've got a fire appliance who will turn out.
Yep.
And secondly, we'd love to have some more retained firefighters.
Yep.
And this is how you find out about it.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a difference between the data we need for ourselves and the data we consciously put into the public domain.
100% agree, Paul.
And a couple of other quite small questions, but they're on a different subject.
Have we finished the comment on that subject matter?
I would just completely agree with what Paul said. It's the reassurance that we absolutely do make sure that whenever we get press inquiries or FOIs or anything to that nature, we always place it back to the communities to say, we need your support in this as well. And I've met with various councillors, as Andy has and David has, over the recent past, where these issues are put to us directly, and we say, we need your support in terms of providing that response, because that response comes from your community. There's nothing else we can do to staff that appliance unless it comes from that community, you know. So,
Chair, sorry, the reason that I really wanted to labour that point was because it is topical. It has been in the news recently, and I want the committee to be aware that we know that we've got some challenges around about just even the recording of that and the presentation of that that data. So, you know, we are on it and we are looking at ways to reflect that appropriately.
I mean, I would look forward to an update at some point about how you intend to tackle that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Paul.
2 other questions or queries. One, again, I'm really impressed by the quality of the data and the way it can be interrogated. That's really good. I would put a word of caution, though, about building too much on statistically insignificant amounts of data. And this comes in particularly on things like fire fatalities, where we don't have sufficient numbers and we're going to be thrown by individual events. So I'm sure the statisticians among you realise that the danger of building too much on that. So that's the warning I want sort of formally. And the question I wanted to ask was on the data on fire motive, which was on your first, it's on the first page and the first slide. I just wanted to check the figures you had on screen were different from the ones in the written paper, which were incredibly enormous. But is it the fire motive just for fire incidents? It's not for anything else. This is not UFAS or other things coming in as deliberate. This is generally just the fires.
So, two things. Apologies. I do believe when the paper was submitted, the fire motive pie chart was showing you the data for all 10 years and was not focused just on the last year. So if that's the case, apologies, you've picked up something that I wasn't aware of. The second thing is, yes, it's fire motive. We don't record cause for false alarms or special service incidents.
Thank you. That's very much that's actually increasingly shocking.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about 55 to 60% is deliberate on real actual ignitions.
Yes.
And just out of interest, you may be able to tell me this, of those, if you look just at the building ones, what would it come down to?
In terms of cause?
Deliberate, yeah.
So again, apologies, I was hoping you'd be able to see this, but I'm just hovering over the pie chart, over deliberate, and what it's showing is other building fires is, for everything that's of a deliberate nature, it's 2.6%, and for dwelling fires, it's 2.1%. So it's relatively small in terms of the 10,000 overall.
Okay, so thank you. That's very reassuring that it's such a small figure. Obviously, I'm assuming the most are refuge and external, so that's fine. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chris, have you concluded your presentation, or is there more you wish to say?
No, the RDS was the last piece that I had to cover, unless there's any questions from committee regarding other aspects.
Okay, thank you. Before I wrap this up, does anybody else have any comments to make? Leslie's waving her hand, so I'll go to Angelina first, then Leslie.
Just very briefly, I just want to say thank you. A truly illuminating session. So thank you.
Okay, Leslie.
Just on that last point, in relation to deliberate fires, am I right in, if I've understood the data correctly, it's 2% of all the deliberate fires were dwelling fires, and whilst that's just 2%, if you translate that into 10,000, my brain's working really slowly, but is that 200 deliberate dwelling fires?
Yes.
Well, that's a big number. That's just quite scary. I just wanted to. And ditto with the 2.61% of other building fires. So we've got kind of 450, 500 deliberate dwelling or other building fires a year.
What I can do, if it helps committee with information, is for the next quarter is I'll expand on that and be able to provide you with a deeper analysis on that and just a bit more insight. Sorry, Nick, that takes us into the arena of working with local authorities and others on tackling the root causes of that, which is incredibly difficult. But I just wanted to pause and just make sure that I'd got my head around that, and for us as a committee, just to acknowledge that whilst it's a small percentage, it's a big number.
Can I just perhaps add some context? That's not a particularly big number in terms of deliberate fires, so it's, from our point of view, I have no concerns. Clearly I've got concerns because it's deliberate fires, but it's not of such a significant nature that it causes us significant grounds for concern.
It's sorry, Stuart, I didn't mean to jump in there, but it's also worth noting we've got 2.35 million dwellings in Scotland. We've got 3.5 million buildings, and we're talking about 200 dwelling fires.
It's the deliberate nature of them. It's the fact that people, on 200 occasions have, for whatever reason, set fire to a dwelling. it's not a subject for just now, Nick. We can.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'd like to just wrap that little bit up there, please, for a second. And Tim.
I was just imagining that it says dwellings, but some of these probably just insurance related. That type.
They could be anything. There could be a fire in a tenement stair from a bin. There could be a bin outside that's caught on the side. But there's millions of different ways that could happen. You know, please don't consider it as purely a deliberate act of malicious intent. It could be a deliberate act of non-malicious intent.
Well, somebody
got out of hand.
Somebody burning the leaves in the back of the garden. Something like that.
Chair,
Okay.
Can I also thought that is considerably less than it was 20 years ago. It would appear to be a declining figure.
Good. That's a very good point as well. If that's true, that's a very good. I'm sure it is, Paul. But I guess my point really to make at the end of all this is, first of all, Chris, fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and we've said consistently at this committee how wonderful it is to have this information, and you're rolling over the cursor. Perhaps we need to just think of a slightly better way in which committee members sitting around a table can see what it is you are ably demonstrating on a screen, which is about 30 feet away. So it's fascinating. I think just one warning point I'll make is that we could spend 3 hours talking about this, and that would be the whole meeting. And I guess there's an art, isn't there, a skill for all of us, and the chair of this meeting is to pick up on the points, pursue them to a certain degree, but then know where the bottom line is before we go down rabbit holes left, right and centre, because there's a phenomenal amount, as you just talked about, purely on deliberate fires. So it is amazing.
And maybe just to add to that point that the Service Delivery Directorate do spend more than 3 hours every month going through this data in very, granular detail, because there's a number of KPIs that sit beneath that. And Chris can keep drilling down as far as you want to go. And we're obviously going to get an opportunity as a board to review the performance management framework and look at our KPIs and say, is these the KPIs that this committee are looking for? So we can look at that work as well. But I think what's clear from today is the journey and the progress that's been made by Chris and the team.
That's fantastic.
Is incredible, and really powerful data now becoming available to us. And David might touch on how that's actually been used operationally at a local level, which is really the point where we want to get to, So it's just to add to the.
Let's capture that comment, because I feel that we might be revisiting that comment about data collection in further papers further down the line. So thank you to all. Thank you to Chris and the team and Richard. And Richard, I see your hand is up. Your last word.
Thank you, Chair. No, Stuart's covered the point about the use of data at the service delivery level. Stuart, Chris, and I are also discussing about how we better do this at the senior management board as well, in terms of additional focus on performance, and also the point you raised there about the committee. We will all get better at this, Chair, in terms of understanding what we're looking at over time. This is still relatively new, the level of detail and insights that you are getting, but glad to see that it's beginning to land as intended. So certainly you and I can discuss in terms of committee planning, perhaps looking at ways that you get better visibility of what's being presented. But thank you for the comments, Chair.
No, well deserved. Thank you. We are woefully late in our agenda, but that was a worthwhile discussion, and I think we should move rapidly, Richard, seeing you here, on to item 8.2. And thanks, Chris. Sorry, I just want to say goodbye, but thank you very much. 8.2 and the action plan updates, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Colleagues, Richard Wetton, Head of Governance, Strategy and Performance, and as normal, committee members and Chair, this is our view of the audit, inspection, action plans and closing reports for this quarter. Chair, I'll try and be brief as always. In terms of a summary, we've got 5 action plans for the committee. this quarter. 2 are before the committee with a recommendation to move to closure, and 1 you will have seen is a closure report. So I'll start going through them one by one, and I'll pause after each one, Chair, for any questions or comments. The first one is related to the operational risk information. This is in response to the HMFSI report on operational risk information, which was published in February 2019. The action plan contained a total of 25 actions to address the recommendations raised by the Inspectorate. 20 of these previously been reported as completed. The 5 actions that we had outstanding, 4 related to the Emergency Services Mobile Communications Programme, or ESMCP, and 1 also related to ESMCP, but specifically around GTAC tablets, which has also been raised earlier on. For those recommendations related directly to the national ESMCP, and as discussed previously at this committee, there's clear evidence that the service has given due regard to these recommendations, but due to the ongoing nature of that national project, they were kept open. But following the discussion at the previous committee, we've also discussed this at a senior management board and with Robert in terms of his role as Her Majesty's Inspector, and believe really that these recommendations should now be closed on the basis that the service has given due regard to them, and that indeed it's part of an evidence national project, which upon completion of that national project will address those recommendations. On the other action, in terms of 4.1, the in-vehicle systems project is taking work forward on all aspects of in-vehicle systems, including the tablets. Again, that was mentioned earlier in a previous discussion. So the recommendation here, Chair, is that the action be closed as evidence that the service has given due regard to that recommendation, and that the specific work will be completed as part of that in-vehicle systems project. Just for further assurance, Chair, that project is being monitored by Digital Board of the service. If the recommendation to move to closure on those is approved, then the remaining actions will be marked as 100% complete for the purpose of this plan, and a closure report will be requested and then submitted for the next reporting period. Thank you, Chair.
I agree with all that you've said. I'm pleased that we've moved on in the way that we have. And unless any of my colleagues have any particular points to make, I intend to say, agree, well done. Let's move on to the next one, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Hurrah. Yes, we've had a hurrah here. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The next one, members, Chair, is the planning and preparedness for COVID-19. This plan related to the SFRS planning and preparedness for COVID-19 during the pandemic, and the report was provided to us by HMI colleagues in December 2020. This, as you remember, following a light touch review rather than a full-scale inspection. To date, 10 of those actions have been completed and 5 actions remain, and members are asked to scrutinise those remaining actions. In terms of action 3.2.12, our recommendation there is to move to close, as this is business as usual. Again, there's clear evidence that the recommendation has been given due regard and that the revised UFAS arrangements are being implemented. The UFAS project is established and is being monitored via corporate risk and performance report, as well as being looked at through various internal management groups and projects. For actions 3.213 and 3.215, again, the recommendation is to move to close business as usual. Evidence here again that the recommendation has been given due regard and that the service delivery model programme, of which you're all familiar, will allow us to evidence and use data to ensure resources are utilised in an efficient, effective way. SDMP is well established and is being monitored by the Change Committee. For actions 3.34 and 3.313, just a request there to note and approve the revised due date of December 2022. This extension will allow the necessary amendments to the report being made as a result of feedback via internal management and governance arrangements. And we discussed this at the most recent senior management board chaired by the Deputy Chief. So the overall RAG rating for this action plan is still green, noted at 95% complete. There's red actions on the action plan, as I've discussed, but the decision at the Senior Management Board was to mark them as green, as it is anticipated that these will be completed within the next period. Thank you, Chair.
Similar comments to last time. I have one point. Well, I'll make them mine now. Is the progress of the post-COVID reset and renew project. Could you just very briefly, I'd probably aim this to Stuart. He said pointed the wrong way. Stuart, very quick. But how is that? How is the reset and renew point? It's slightly off topic, but just a quick sentence or two on that.
Yeah, so
how's that being managed?
It's been managed through, so the SMB have oversight of the progress of that. From recollection, I think there's 4 outstanding actions. They're being managed through the appropriate corporate boards and then reported back through SMB. And just for an additional layer of assurance, it's part of an internal audit. So internal audit carried out a review of our reset, renew and recovery actions, and it's due for an update for the next ARAC as well in terms of progress against that.
And and simply because of the item I've referenced before about going to the board, do you see that as a point that would possibly? In fact, I'll leave that to the chair.
It'd be ARAC. It'd go to ARAC. Yeah.
Okay. All right. If colleagues don't have anything to say, everybody's nodding. Okay. Thank you. Well done, Richard. Thank you. Next, please.
Thank you, Chair. The next action plan relates to the HMFSI report on fire safety enforcement arrangements published back in 2018, January 2018. The committee are asked to note and approve the closure of the remaining action, which is 6.2, which is related to the development of risk-based inspection programs. SMB have agreed to close this action. Again, there's clear evidence that the recommendation has been given due regard, and the SFRS are actively engaged in a UK-wide national NFCC risk-based inspection programme process, which when complete will bring about a standard approach to this recommendation across the UK. Work is progressing and the NFCC work is due to complete by the end of 2023. So still a considerable time from the original action, Chair. We are more than aware of that. However, this is the most reasonable path to green in terms of part of that national project. So if the recommendation above is approved, the remaining actions will be marked as complete for the purposes of this action plan, and a closure report will be submitted for the next reporting period. Thank you, Chair.
I am, just before I come to John about HMFSI representation at that NFCC risk-based inspection programme, does anybody have any comments about what Richard's just said? No? Okay. John, this was a question purely out of interest. Is the HMFSI represented at the NFCC inspection programme?
I am unsure.
No. Okay. All right. That was just purely of interest. Thank you, Richard. And then that takes us on to any comments you want to make about the LAIs.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is just the accumulated actions that result from the local area inspections, or the previous model of local area inspections from the Inspectorate. Just as a reminder, Chair, LSOs have the responsibility for the preparation and progress of action plans for specific local recommendations. It's the national recommendations arising from these that cannot be actioned by an LSO that are captured within these plans. And the actions that are contained within the current one that you see before you are a mixture between Dumfries and Galloway, Edinburgh, Midlothian, and the most recent one, which was Argyll and Bute. So the 2 remaining actions that we have are both recommended for closure. So there's action M1 relating to the replacement of incident ground radio systems. Senior Management Board have agreed to close this action. Again, there's clear evidence that the recommendation has been given due regard, and the project is now underway as part of the ICT work plan. This is due for completion as part of normal business in March 2023. Progress is being monitored through the SFRS digital board, just for your assurance, Chair. the digital board, we go through each project, ICT project, in a reasonable amount of detail. The other action, Chair, is the action AB1 relating to the adequate provision of scrap vehicles to maintain core crew skills. The Senior Management Board again has agreed to close this action. Again, there's clear evidence that the recommendation has been given due regard. Project underway, due to complete in December this year, managed by Training, Safety and Assurance. That project includes essentially making sure that they've got enough scrap to cut up. If the recommendation is approved, the remaining actions will be marked as 100% complete. The action plan will be only updated again once new recommendations are identified from any area inspections. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Noted. I'm not expecting any comments from that. No. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Just say, and this pragmatic approach is a breath of fresh air, frankly.
Good. Excellent.
It really is.
Fine speech. That's good.
It's a short one.
Chair, I think David wants to come in, Chair.
Can I just make a brief comment on that? Because it has been a bit of a sea change in terms of the way that we are encouraging people to look at these action plans. And it's a lot about the language and the spirit of the recommendations. I don't know if John would like to make a comment on this, but in terms of things like consider, participate in, review, we have traditionally taken those actions to the nth degree and look to go to implementation or look to create something from a service point of view, and we won't close off the action until we have completed our response to the action as opposed to the action itself. And I think, given due regard and commentary that Richard's provided today, is a bit of a sea change in terms of the way that we think about these actions and the spirit of them. And I'm really happy that that's the direction that we're taking around about these things.
Likewise. Any further comment?
Yep, entirely happy, David. I think you expected entirely happy that these items move to business as usual, but by their very nature, if they hadn't been addressed, they will turn up on an iterative basis. So I guess the proof of the pudding will be in future inspections when questions are put to staff, the service. If these issues keep popping up, then they potentially remain live and would come back. But if they don't come up, then they've been dealt with. So yeah, I think it's an appropriate. It moves to BAU.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for that. And that still leaves one last thing for Richard to talk about, and that's the closing statement of the C2.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is, as you'll see, all actions relating to the action plan were agreed complete during the last period, Chair, and were in response to the recommendations contained within the HMFSI report received in August 2020. So to complete that process, members are now provided with a full closing statement from the action plan, and members are asked to note the content of that statement. Just for as a reminder, members will note that we introduced this closure report to try and provide that sort of end-to-end commentary where possible in the form of opening and closing statements against the specific recommendations and actions. So whilst it doesn't, in some of the responses, doesn't particularly slavishly follow that, in terms of colleagues have perhaps put everything in one place, as it were, it does provide us with an end-to-end view of hopefully the full response that the service took in response to that plan. But it's there for your scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Again, I'll just say the similar type of comments that have been said before. This has been a few years in the making. We've been through various iterations and various developments as we've gone through, and now having closing statements, which and there's still work ongoing with these types of, you know, and the wording and things, but it's fantastic and it's really great, and we can see the fruits of the labours, we can see the difference we're making, and it's really neat and manageable for a committee like this to form its overview. So I am presuming. Just checking, there's no further comments on that. No, excellent. Thank you. Well, in summary, Richard and all the team, excellent work. And I look forward then at the next meeting to see a couple more of the closing statements from the provisional ORI and the fire safety enforcement. So that will be excellent. And then, of course, we'll be bringing in the high rise building action plan as well. Marvellous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. In terms of just timing now, I would normally break for a quick admin break, but I'll tell you what I'd like to do. Can we just quickly do the clinical governance piece, please? And then we'll have a quick admin break before midday, which hopefully will bring in the other David. Sorry, Ali. And we'll take it from there. Right. Clinical governance and item 9.2, please. Right, sorry about this, Debbie, and jumping around, but I'm sure you'll cope. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Andy Watt, Director of Training, Safety and Assurance. Yeah, papers come to committee today providing an overview, or a high-level overview of the clinical governance structure and arrangements that we will put in place within the service. Was one of the initial pieces of work I picked up coming into post, and I've engaged with Nick round about this piece of work and progressing it. So it probably broadens the scope of what was initially discussed when clinical governance first came to the committee. That's based around the 7 pillars of clinical governance, as you'll see within the document. It is quite high level. It's a fairly light document. I have any questions on that. It has been to SMB recently, and there's a couple of points picked up from discussion at SMB, namely one is the reference to the Term Committee, which was taken from the Scottish Ambulance Service in terms of their clinical governance committee structure. However, we'll look to change that to group or something rather than committee, as it confuses things slightly in terms of internal governance. So we'll update that as part of the review, but we'll need to update the SLT and the memorandum of understanding as well as part of that piece of work. The other piece of work that will come off the back of the discussion at SMB is a workshop with SMB round about their role as the clinical governance group, and the Scottish Ambulance Service colleagues will assist in that workshop, as well as drafting up a terms of reference for the clinical governance. Happy to any questions. I think we can see within the service delivery quarterly update report today we had a general clinical governance update, which we'll see coming forward as part of the governance arrangements on a quarterly basis, as well as an annual report on clinical governance. And Ops Assurance at the moment are working with SAS in terms of what that annual report would contain and what we can look at in terms of performance indicators or things we would like to look at. And that'll develop as we work that forward. Sure. So happy to any questions.
Thank you. Great piece of work. Puts a level of structure onto this fairly new element of fire and rescue service business, or a developing area. So it needs to be just structured correctly. Does anybody have any questions or comments to make about it? Was it clear when you read it?
Totally clear. Can I ask just one question?
So
you've gone very close to the ambulance service, which I totally agree on. Does the police have one?
Sure. Police have one what?
A clinical governance structure.
I don't know. I don't. Richard would know from his experience with Police Scotland.
Well, when I left, it was a key cause of conversation amongst the service, particularly around mental health aspects. So I believe in terms of the new call centre model that was being developed at the time, clinical governance was being openly discussed. So whilst I don't know for sure, I'd be very surprised if they didn't.
I just wondered, because it's something you think might be for the 3 services to. What you're doing is absolutely fine for the fire service. I'm just interested whether the police.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Good bit of work. Thanks to Ali and the work he's done with that. I feel very much more content now that we've taken a step change and put the high level governance reporting structure in, so we know where we stand. And I look forward to working with you now for the annual report that will work it its way up through the flow diagram and then into the service delivery committee of the board, because I think that will be an interesting end of year summary when we get that. Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to eke every available minute out of this meeting, so just bear with me, please. This is called agile working. See, we've got, sorry to talk out loud for this now. So we've got the home fire safety visits. That'll be a fair discussion. We've got the complaints with Carol as well. That'll be, I don't want to stifle that just with 5 or 10 minutes. So that's for later. The risk spotlight.
Do you want to do the risk register, Chair?
Well, perhaps I could just come on to John. Would you mind? I'm really sorry. I don't normally do this, but the HMFSI overview report. I would just please. I've just. You and David can compare notes a bit later on as to how I've just left you in the match.
You're actually a wee bit slow, Chair, and nominating me. I was waiting on you.
You never volunteered though, John.
Okay, go.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So colleagues will have seen the paper and will be familiar with its content. Currently, HMFSI has a number of pieces of work ongoing. Service delivery inspection, which I've had a small part to play in, is ongoing. Currently in City of Edinburgh, and Falkirk and West Lothian work will begin December, due to conclude at the end of the calendar year. You'd mentioned just a second ago, firefighting in high-rise buildings. The report has been laid before Parliament. There's 8 recommendations within that report, and as a good practice, has been 5 highlighted. Climate change and its impact on operational activity, which the DEP mentioned earlier, in terms of operational activity, is ongoing. However, the field work for that did get impacted by the death of Her Majesty the Queen, and that's been picked back up. We also have a change of personnel, which is going to impact that, but we don't anticipate it having a drastic revision of timeline for it. Mental health and wellbeing is my own inspection. It does say there are no changes to the outline were requested by SFRS, but I did have an 11th, well beyond 11th hour request for a small change, which I spoke to Jerry Thompson about, and we agreed to that. It's more sympathetic language, which aids both the HMI and fire service colleagues. So that is where we are. Robert Scott also has a piece of work which is ongoing with Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. It is nearing completion and should conclude in January. I think they're in report writing mode and going through iteration to that. So that is essentially where we are.
Okay, thank you. Anybody, any questions for John's report? No. Thank you. I've just got one very quick. Excuse me, sorry. One very quick question, and that's purely out of interest because we talk about high-rise buildings, and it's not necessarily for you, but I'm sure you'll both be able to answer this very easily. This is just in, firefighting in high-rise buildings. The thrust of your inspection was domestic buildings. Due to the life risk, sorry if I'm pausing here, just what additional commentary could you add in terms of, and I think because I stayed in a Premier Inn last night, you look at the centre of Glasgow and up Buchanan Street, there is a very, very tall Premier Inn. I'm presuming that you'd see that as a commercial building. Yeah, non-domestic building. Is there any difference in the way you go about tackling a fire in a building like that compared to a block of flats, which again you can see from the top of the Premier Inn? You know, is there any difference in that? This is purely of interest and education.
a number of built environment, passive and active fire protection measures is a slightly different approach, but a high rise is a high rise and we would approach it in the same manner. But there's different levels of protection within hotel, for example. You know, I'm mindful of Paul sitting at the end of the tables, but yeah, there's different built environment issues.
Okay.
But it's the same approach. We still class them as a high rise. We will still approach them as a high rise, and you know, so we'll still have high risers. We'll still go lobby protection and all that kind of stuff. You know, so our tactics are very similar.
I'm sorry, it's a bit of an out of the blue question. It's just it's my non-specialist knowledge just butting up against very specific and defined high rise.
My report does refer to non-domestic high rises as well, so we take them in the round as being the same.
Right.
Yep,
that was it.
like you was tactically very similar. Protected staircases, alarm systems, concierge or hotel staff. And perhaps in hotels, I think as Stuart says, you may have more inbuilt safety features.
I think the more fundamental difference is as a manager or management process to manage the fire safety within the building. And that's kind of the grey area between that and domestic that we've tried to plug through the Grenfell working group as well. You know, but there'll be a fire risk assessment, there'll be fire action plans, there'll be, as I say, active and passive measures and things like that as well, sprinklers, etc.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
I'm sure if Paul would like to add anything to that. Or...
Absolutely not.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you for perseverance. It's 10:02. May I suggest we just have a 10-minute break? We'll come back at 12. Could those responsible for trying to get David in?
Ali.
Sorry, Ali and Kathy back in. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, it's midday. Could you tell me where we're up to in starting off with the home fire safety visit? Right, David, do you want to bring in this subject? Or do you just want to hand over to Ali?
I'm very conscious of both the size of the report, the content of the report, and the time we have available. So without going into a great preamble, I think the safest way to go through this is to say that effectively this report was born out of a couple of requests to committee to get a bit of information around about home fire safety visits. Clearly, over a period of time, there's been a lot of input around about the outputs and what we've been doing in terms of home fire safety visits. But this paper, which was put together by Kathy in conjunction with support from Data and Chris Fitzpatrick in particular, goes some way to addressing, I think, the ask of the Service Delivery Committee, albeit, and I think we'll cover that as we go through, there are elements where there are shortcomings, and those are around about the academic support and the field evaluation. However, we have made reference in the paper to other services and other areas that have gone through similar pieces of work, albeit with the caveat that it's not exactly comparing apples with apples because of the way that we have run it in Scotland. So without further ado, I think it would be useful just to bring Ali and Kathy in as a joint venture just to talk through the paper, but I would anticipate that time for questions is most important in this particular paper. Thank you.
Welcome, Ali. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, just everybody. Apologies, we've been tied up otherwise this morning. I'm not going to talk much about the paper, but I'll hand over to Kathy very shortly. Home fire safety visits are clearly a huge part of our strategy within community safety engagement. They're sort of flagship and really important for us in improving the safety of our communities. So we need to ensure they work properly. So it's been a valuable opportunity for us to review some of the evidence. So it has been helpful to have the request from the committee. We are going through a number of other considerations regarding home fire safety visits at the moment. Clearly, we've got Safe and Well on the horizon, and I've done an awful lot of work there and have the pilot currently completed. We're looking at our strategy going forward with the fitting of smoke detectors, and we also would like to move, as covered in the paper, towards a more targeted approach. You know, we want to be as efficient and as effective as we can as a service, and that means learning from COVID, where we saw people dying who make the call criteria living alone over the age of 60 with vulnerabilities. We need to target these people. It's a moral duty, and that's part of our desire to move towards a more targeted approach at high risk. I'm going to stop there because I know there's a lot of questions. I'll pass over to Kathy and ask Kathy to talk briefly to the paper, and then we'll open it up for questions. So thanks very much, and thanks to Richard's team for his support in producing the paper.
Okay, thanks. Afternoon, everybody. I won't go through the paper in too much detail because I'm sure you've all read it, but I think we were asked to look at a few areas around kind of performance, about the impact of home fire safety visits, how we target, if we target, etc. So that has been captured within the document, but I think I know Chris is on the call. I think there's a bit of a caveat with it in terms of a lot of the data. We probably would need a bit more academic support or further analysis to really draw out some of the conclusions that we've been asked for by this committee. So we've provided what we can with the data and the information that we have to date, and that's what you'll see in the paper there. So I'm not sure how much detail you would like me to talk through it, or if you would like me just to kind of go to discussion and questions around it, because I feel that might be more important for the committee. But if you would like me to discuss any part of the paper in detail, then please let me know, and I can do that for you.
Kathy, thank you. First of all, Kathy, thanks very much for all your work. And just to let you know that you were described earlier as the person who knows most about home fire safety visits. So
okay.
No, in terms of just having an in-depth knowledge of it all. So thank you very much indeed. I think you're probably right in your assessment of what's important at the moment. We will have all read this. This has been a report that we've been, well, this is a subject we've been discussing for years, to be quite honest with you, in various different guises. And it's come out now into this, and I know colleagues will have a lot of questions. So I think we should probably just thank you for the work you've done now, and then open it up to questions. I know. Despite the silence, there will be questions. Leslie.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Ali. It's a fascinating paper, and particularly also fascinating combined with the source of home fire safety visits that Chris took us through earlier in the meeting. I think there are some points that I would like to make about PIs and academic work on effectiveness and on costs, and if I can come on to those in a minute. But I think my biggest point, question really, reflects what Ali was saying. This is our prime kind of prevention methodology for households. And given all the increased risks associated with cost of living crisis, how can we really target these visits to a much greater extent than we have targeted them in the past? If I pause there, please.
It's a great opening question. Who wants to?
Kathy, do you want to go first, and I'm happy to add some detail?
I'm happy to answer. So I think we have covered in the paper that although we don't necessarily use data so much to target individual households at the moment, it's not to say our work isn't targeted. A huge amount of the work that our community action teams do is working with partners to make sure we're identifying those most at risk in the communities through high value referrals. So I think we need to build upon that. I think, being honest, I think we've seen a slight reduction since COVID and during COVID because partners have been retrenched into their core business. So what we're trying to do, and we've been doing that, I think you maybe saw in the Spotlight paper about trying to do some more awareness raising with partners to understand what the risks of fire are, to make sure we're targeting households through their referrals. So that's what we can do moving forward. I think we can use some of the data tools that we have to maybe look at different data sources and overlay them and look at individual households. What we need to be cautious around with that is information governance. We cannot go directly to people's homes because data's told us you're most at risk of fire. So we would need to look at ways that we could look at certain communities or streets or something to be able to target those. But I think as well, stations know who are those most vulnerable in their communities. So I would like to think, and they are doing it already, they will be working in communities, and they're doing it, for example, going to food banks at the moment. We do a lot of that targeted work at communities. It might not be seen that way in terms of, like, say, data, but please rest assured that we are targeting our home fire safety visits, and we'll continue to do that, and partnership work is imperative to that.
That's an interesting slant on that, Kathy, to be honest with you. Did you want to add anything?
I think I'll just reaffirm the point I made earlier in terms of, and Kathy's touched on this, our use of data and the use of the CRIM model and things like that. That CRIM model is not just being built to determine a response model. There's so much value in what we've got in terms of the mosaic data and things like that, and ACON data, that allows us to target our resources to the most vulnerable. So for me, the panacea is use of that and the very robust partnership referral methodology, where we tie with health colleagues to identify the most vulnerable, overlay those, and that gives us where we need to target our prevention activities much more surgically than we currently do. And as I say, I think that's the panacea in terms of how we take this forward and target most vulnerable. I think we touched on that other day at the board strategy day around about that real priority in terms of inequalities, you know, and that should be our focus in terms of how we target that the home fire safety visit programme.
Okay, Leslie.
I'm conscious Ali wants in.
Go ahead, Ali.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to build on what Kathy said, there's a number of strands that inform our targeting and allow us to target community fire safety, home fire safety visits. Within the paper, it talks about the CSET tool and the limitations of the current CSET tool, and how we can't change the some of the targeting criteria within that, but we are aware there are other key risks emerging, and that comes from the excellent engagement between different parts of the function that's been built over the years. You know, it's been in existence for years, but really strengthened over the last few, particularly fire investigation, informing community safety engagement, the great work between Kathy and David Dooley, which is fantastic. And that's identified things like airflow mattresses, like emollient creams early on. And although CSET won't allow us to put them in as criteria to respond to those risks, through the partnership work Kathy's talking about, her team, working with David, are able to target the visits at premises that we are aware have those risks within them. So it will be great when we get an alternative to CSET where we can use these as part of the formal targeting tool, but rest assured, on that more informal side through partnership working, we're very much identifying early and responding to these new risks that the communities are facing.
Leslie.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks all for those responses. At a number of board strategy days, we have spoken, a number of different forums indeed, we have spoken about how we do more, how we place more emphasis on prevention. And if I can maybe address this to Stuart, is at the moment we are running, I don't know, between 30, 35, 40% on a high risk, and that on high risk visits. How high could we get that, Stuart? Just could we go to 60, 65%?
In terms of how many high risk visits we deliver?
Yeah, so I'm talking about when you look at the data, we've got an awful lot of low risk ones going on. If we were to really start using the CRIM data, you know, accept that we, you know, not every day in a particular street will be high risk, but actually we reckon 80% will be. So not wait until we've got perfect data, but just go now, follow our guts, follow our intelligence, use the CRIM data. How high could we push the percentage of home fire safety visits to high risk?
Okay, so over the last, probably since during the COVID period, we've made a conscious decision to try and move away from low and medium risk visits. Our current methodology curtails that slightly in terms of CSET and the scoring matrix, and the safe and well work that Kathy and the team have been developing will allow us to move forward with that, to move away from that kind of current scoring matrix. Ultimately, for me, I'd like to see 100% of high risk visits And because we know that medium, because all our intelligence tells us and all our operational data tells us that those within medium and low risks are not vulnerable to fire, because we can see that. So we need to focus all our attentions at the high risk. So for me, 100% is the answer to your question, Leslie. Kathy, I'll maybe bring Kathy in terms of her views on that as well.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on it with what we're aiming to do with Safe and Well, is that you will only be eligible for a visit if you meet the criteria. So we're moving away from that low medium, so that is the panacea, that we will be moving to only those who meet the criteria of being at risk of fire that will receive them. So hopefully that is what we're trying to transition to. As we've alluded to as well, CSET, unfortunately, we were not able to amend the criteria. So there will be some limitations with that, but Safe and Well will hopefully see us move to that 100%. But I think, again, it's understanding what do we mean by high risk, and that risk changes all the time as well when you emerging risk. So I think we've got to be careful about what criteria sometimes we use, because there will be some people who are potentially medium risk visits that will be at risk to fire because we've not been able to update it, and changes in their circumstances, and particularly with the cost of living crisis. Yeah. I think there's still value in some of these medium risk visits at the moment as well.
Interesting point. Leslie, there's a few other people who want to speak. Do you just want to say a couple of concluding comments on that? It's on this point, sorry, the other people want to speak on this point.
Cool. Okay, my concluding comment on that is I think that we as a full board should think about our direction to the executive on this. Not that you guys need any direction. We're all going the same way. But I think in terms of our targets for next year is just really pushing this, and it will require lateral thinking on the basis of the targeting, because clearly CSET is not doing it for us. Apologies, Nick, that's my last word in this area. I would like to come back in a couple of other areas. Yeah, of course, thank you.
There's absolutely no need to apologise, Leslie, because this is obviously going to be a comment. There's a discussion, sorry, a topic we're going to discuss a bit. Tim?
It's just a question of clarification around the statistical accuracy about targeting. My understanding of reading the report was that the classification of risk premises in the statistics is based on a post-visit classification.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's so in terms of the, you could target 100% and then your post-visit might turn out to be 70% a high risk.
So I'll bring Kathy to keep me right here, because I'm probably going to get this wrong, but we do a pre-score and we do a post-score to find out what the impact of our visit has been in terms of the risk within the premise. Kathy, do you want
to? It would be helpful to clarify that, because my reading of it was
that
the statistics were post-classification statistics. So if we could clarify that.
Yeah, that's correct. And I'll bring Chris in a second. Unfortunately, that's the data that Chris could pull. I did put a table later on that showed the pre-risk visit. So we would expect to see higher pre-risk visits, and obviously after we've conducted that visit, we would ideally like to see that risk come down, because we've put in the provision of advice and detection, etc. So we would hopefully see it come down. So that's where the figures are slightly different. But I'll bring Chris in if that's okay around the data.
Thanks, Kathy. I wouldn't labour the point. It's been quite difficult for us to do what we have done. Again, I've made the point on a number of occasions about the data within CSET, and the means and being able to analyse that just means that doing a deep dive for you is practically an impossible thing for us to do. We can give you an overview, which is what we've done of the responses that are provided for the questions that are posed to determine pre-risk and post-risk. So at this stage, with the time that we had, all that we were able to do was look at the post-risk. And Kathy did make the point to me when that work was done that it would actually be more beneficial taking the pre-risk information into account. But again, it's with the timeframes that we were talking about and trying to get something in front of you, just not doable. We have to be realistic when we consider the work that has been done elsewhere. It's not like 4 or 5 weeks work. People in London have taken 9 months to do something like this.
That's helpful. That's helpful. I just wanted to clarify that point because it's quite an important distinction. And what I didn't understand was that you were taking into account the interventions that you've done to reclassify people. Because my understanding was that you turned up somewhere thinking it might be high risk, and in actual fact, it was medium risk. And I thought that was implied by some of the legislative changes in terms of getting the new smoke detectors in, that people are putting themselves forward at higher risk and then turn out not to be. So I think it's a little bit muddy around those numbers for me. And I appreciate that's not an accusation, it's an understanding of all of the challenges associated with it.
I think to be clear about that, I think it's a very complex environment, isn't it? And we're fairly fresh and new into it. Although we're just looking at a very simplistic top layer view on it all.
Can I just make the point, just in terms of that, absolutely reinforces the point that we need to use the data through the CRIM model and partnership referrals to target our home fire safety visits, as opposed to people. Were you going to say that? I was just sorry. No, as opposed to people self-identifying themselves as high risk. Because to all intents and purposes, people were gaming the system because it became quite clear how you could get yourself to high risk. Our crews turn up and they're far from high risk. They're looking for upgraded smoke detectors. So, again, it's just another driver for change in terms of how we need to change our delivery of this.
Angelina.
Thank you. So I think what Stuart has just said probably covers off my first point, but let me start with a broader observation. Thank you very, very much for this paper. It's immensely helpful, and it's clear that it's been produced despite the deficiencies in the systems that you've had to work with to produce it. So kind of doubly appreciate it in those conditions. But my first point was in and around the relationship between the four main sources of referral that Chris helpfully, slightly coincidentally, went through with us in the main performance report, and the category of risk, because the number of low risk is quite striking, but the post-visit element of that puts a different light on that. What am I trying to say? I think what I'm trying to say is surely we need to bring common sense to it and work on the basis that the strongest source of pre-visit high risk visits is going to be the partner referral pathway. Surely we have to max out on that. You know, weak systems or not weak systems, that's a human judgment driven, partner insight driven pathway. So that's my first one. So surely we have capacity in terms of living as aligned to our strategy as we can, despite all the system weaknesses. Surely we can marshal our colleagues and our team capacity in that direction. I accept it's quite a big job, but surely that's what we can do. That's a leadership task, not a system issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe with Kathy in terms of here, local prevention and protection management teams are really well connected with partners at a local level, and Kathy are really connected with partners at a national level. So we absolutely do drive those partnership referrals. But they don't always come through. And where it becomes very, very clear, Angelina, is following every fatal fire that we have, we do a case conference. And 90+% of the time, those individuals were known to another partner agency. But we were. It's a perennial problem which we keep pushing for and things like that. Or maybe Ali's put his hand up, so from a P&P perspective, it's
the screen has lit up with hands. Let's.
I think Ali wants on that point.
So Ali, then Richard, then no, I thought Leslie had a hand up. Okay, Ali, then Richard.
Thanks very much again, Chair. Yeah, just on the partnership approach, other work we're doing nationally and doing this with Kathy and the team, we're building memorandums of understanding with key partner agencies, one of which, for example, is the Royal Voluntary Service, who attend around 15,000 households in Scotland that very much almost everyone meets our criteria of to make the call campaign living alone over the age of 60, mobility issues. And indeed, speaking to the representative, they said many of the volunteers meet the same criteria because they're volunteering partly because it gets them out and about and allows them to meet people. So we're exploring innovative ways of generating these referrals with partners, and that's just one example. Another is ROSPA, and providing or getting access to information through ROSPA that we can use and provide to these vulnerable people. So there is a joint up approach, the local partnerships and us trying to produce partnerships that can generate access to these people at a national level, along with sitting on cross-party groups in Scottish Government, the Accident Prevention Group and the Age and Ageing group to work and generate more referrals. So just that reassurance, I suppose. Thanks.
Thank you, Alec. Richard?
Yes, thank you, Joe. I was just going to make a further point about that targeting approach, partly which Stuart's raised in terms of using the CRIM, as it were. There's also an opportunity which we've mentioned previously. In fact, we were going to show you at the board strategy day, but we ran out of time. But there is an opportunity here in terms of what Ali said about innovation for us to think again where we might be in the future here. So we've been working with Glasgow University as well as a student there on a spatiotemporal approach to predictive fire dwelling activity. So that's basically using AI techniques and massive amounts of data to try and improve that predictive analysis. So what effectively that means in simple terms is it gives you a much higher rate percentage of meaning that your intervention will be where it needs to be effectively. So and what we know from that, and it is an academic pilot, but what we know from that pilot is that that's even better than the local knowledge in terms of the prediction it gives you. We're now at the stage of working with Census, who's one of the Glasgow sort of innovation hubs, to see, is this usable? Is this something that can be done? And the only reason I mention it, and I realise that it's an innovative data piece, but there are existing platforms that are similar to this that are in operation practically in other parts of the world. So Chris and I have certainly seen two that are used in the States. Not exactly the same, but very similar in terms of using predictive analytics to augment that local knowledge so that your hit rates are into the 90 percentiles rather than the 80 percentiles. So again, I just want to make the point, Chair, is that we are trying to think in terms of the future for this as well, to support colleagues in P&P and service delivery. Thanks.
No, thank you. Leslie.
Thanks. On this point, and I really welcome what Richard has just said. I agree absolutely with you, Angelina. We need to move the partnership working. We need to get as much out of partnership working as we can. But if we're going to increase our percentage on high risk, it's been stubborn at kind of 40-odd%. We have to look to alternative models, and the AI thing and using the CRIM seem to me to be two very obvious ways that we can push in combination with getting as much as we possibly can from partners.
David, sorry.
I suppose just to follow up, I agree with everything that's been said, and in terms of those 4 referral pathways that Chris went through in terms of the performance report, you can actually see the decline in the PDIR's direct targeting clearly and self-referral, and obviously we are actively trying to focus on the partner referrals. But I think in terms of the percentages and the numbers that are involved in it, and Leslie's point earlier on, a lot of the current performance is driven by the current targets, not targeting, the current targets. And I think the point that you made earlier, Leslie, was that you'd like the board to have some sort of guidance and influence to the executive around about what that target might look like. And I think that is the key conversation for us to be having here, because we need to understand but actually the performance is driven by numbers, not by quality. It's quantity versus quality. And I think that's where we need to go with this.
Well, that's really fascinating, because I think frequently when we look at these PIs, we say the key PI is the percentage high risk, and the fact that if the operational staff are focused on numbers, then that is an issue. Can I just expand on the PI point? I think that I was thinking again, just what would be more helpful PIs. We've spoken before about effectiveness ones, and what percentage of households that have had a home fire safety visit change behaviour is clearly a very important one, but that's academic, and that's longer term. So leaving that to one side, I think if ones that I don't question mark, and Chris and everybody else on the call will have more better views than I, but I wonder if there's something about percentage of households that have an accidental dwelling fire that didn't have a home fire safety visit but actually should have done. There's also one doing back of an envelope numbers. It seems that maybe about 1 in 8 households have had a home fire safety visit since 2014. But what would that number be for high risk households? Could we do a bit of really rough and ready checking of how many high risk households there are, and just getting a feel for, are we at 1 in 5, are we at 1 in 10, or whatever? So I think there's some thinking around potential PIs that we could do perhaps for the next performance management framework, but certainly to me it's a no-brainer that a key performance PI that we can go to now is percentage of home fire safety visits on that are targeted in high risk. And I would look forward to talking further in relation to other potential PIs.
Right, so Chris, no doubt you want to speak on this, then Angelina as well, and then Paul as well. And also I'm conscious, Ali and Kathy, how long have we got you for now?
As long as you need. The interviews have completed. It's okay.
Okay, all right. Well, we promise we won't pull it out too long. Chris, Angelina, then Paul.
Leslie, apologies. I should have been scribbling down a couple of points you'd made. I'll try and make sure I cover what I remembered. But the key thing, you made excellent points. We should be able to look at our fire data alongside our home fire safety visit data, but that is the biggest challenge we've had. That's why it's been so difficult for us to align this. The CSET system is still using, it uses UPRN based geocoding. IRS still uses Easterns and Northerns. That's one of the biggest changes we had been expecting with the new control system, is it would be UPRN based, and then it means that we can intertwine both sets of information. So that's a change that is obviously coming, but we don't have that ability just now. But even to look at it on an aggregate basis, we don't have the same geographical references in CSET. It still uses the ward boundaries from 2001, whereas the IRS system would be looking to the ward boundaries that were put in place in 2011. And we've got another boundary commission change coming, so we want to make sure that both systems are effective in being able to report on that. So that's the biggest challenge from us. You did make another point that I thought was excellent. I should have scribbled it down.
It was the percentage of high risk households that get a visit.
Yeah, right. So I absolutely agree with you. I mean, there has to be information that exists within our partners that should help us identify what volume of households we have as a kind of 100% figure for most vulnerable across Scotland. But there's a lot of challenges in being able to get that. But if we could, we would have something measurable to show what we're reaching out to. But some of the information I'd provided as supporting evidence for Kathy and Ali was just to bear in mind when we talk about we're doing 70,000 visits a year. Each year we're picking up new high risk people who we touch upon year after year after year. So the number of households I think we uniquely reach out to is gradually declining because we've got a limited resource with the staff that are available. So that's just something else we need to be bearing in mind. But the information is there. We should be able to work more closely with partners to get access to that and allow us to demonstrate how we're reaching the most vulnerable, those most in need.
I think in this area, clearly the information challenges are absolutely flipping massive. But I think that in this area, again, perhaps more than others, it's incredibly important not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or the good be the enemy of the worthwhile. So given the challenges in cost of living crisis, and we are all absolutely clear that the right way to go is high risk, then okay, the data will catch up when the data can catch up, but that shouldn't in any way slow us down from just, lateral thinking, finding ways of really pushing that high risk up.
Okay, I'm just going to have to move us on at a pace, because we will be here when the sun sets otherwise. So, Angelina.
Taking that steer from our chair, I will ditch several of my points and just share one of them. And it's this, throughout the paper, in a number of places, it refers to the lack of, academic research support in a spirit that suggests it's a kind of distant dream, unlikely to be achieved. And I wouldn't disagree with that in the current climate. But I suppose my point is there's a big range in between, a peer-reviewed piece of academic gold standard stuff, so the Rolls Royce at one end, and a pair of bicycle clips at the other. I don't think we should come at this from that kind of all or nothing perspective. There is surely something very useful and insightful that could be done that sits about the middle there, that would both inform our future targeting and, frankly, give our people a bit more of a motivational narrative to go with their efforts in this area, it seems to me. So, for example, back to the partner referral pathway issue, at 310.5 of this report says we don't and can't record any equalities data, but I struggle to see how we've got a referral pathway that doesn't have some snippets of equalities information as part of what passes between us and our partners, or indeed our own referral mechanism. So, I do wonder if there's something not at that gold standard academic level, but that with some analyst expertise, if not our own, then maybe from around the community planning partnership table, where there's quite a bit between various partners, whether we could do more without just regretting the loss of that sort of far distant academic piece. I just think it's a very striking gap that we can't turn all this hard work into something more analytic and a good narrative to go with it.
Thank you, Angelina. Paul, sorry.
I think this is a very good paper. I think the work we're doing is really good. But I actually disagree with some of the things that have been said by my colleagues. And I'm not going to try and take it apart line by line, because that's not helpful. But to give a sort of tangential view, I think we have a good thing that we are doing. A really good thing we are doing. I think the decision to move to principally partner referral is absolutely right. And I think the concentration on sheer numbers is clearly unhelpful when we come to looking at PIs. What I'd like to see as a PI is that we're dealing with all the partner referrals which are appropriate, for instance.
Exactly.
Within the TIMIUS approach. I'm not actually convinced that we need more and more data on this, because I'm not certain that more and more data will actually yield more and more in terms of output, in terms of reduction of casualties and reduction of fatalities, which is what the end point is. So, yes, we should deal with some referrals if they come into the high risk category. Yes, we'll get some referrals from crews that have attended incidents if they think that's appropriate. But we should concentrate on partner referrals, to my mind, not trying to target it ourselves. There may be some strange things we want to do, like having a fire crew at the food bank, finding out and listening, that sort of thing, maybe as part of our community engagement. But I'm not totally convinced about targeted. I was very struck by the cost of these because it's so low. I think it's £52 per visit, which I thought was really good. I'd be interested to know what the effect would be is if when you're visiting one, you also chat the doors around it and how much that added to it. If you can gain extra benefit when you've already got that there. I don't know, but I think we are doing a good job. I think this is a great paper. I think the quality of analysis we're getting from your team is superb. I'm not convinced we need a vast amount of academic research or additional information.
Some interesting views, Paul. Thank you. No, I mean that genuinely. This is the whole point of having this. Just before I just come back to Kathy, and I'll give you just a warning on this, Kathy. I just like your very honest view that in a second, when I've made a couple of other points, is if you could wave a magic wand, you know, what one or two fairly straightforward changes would you like to see made to the environment we're in at the moment that you feel would make a difference to it? Because you are without doubt, you know, far more informed than we are about this. But just before you do this, that's to give you a minute's heads up. You know, this is a fantastically important aspect of what we do, isn't it? Leslie made the point, and it's obvious to all of us all. If we could really tie this down, we could make a significant change. We could, in really big outcome terms, to the people of Scotland. We could be spending money in a way which is probably more effectively, and we really could be reducing risk on roads and et cetera, et cetera. So it's fantastic. I think in the interim, my take on all this is we just need to move forward in some pretty agricultural chunks, and I think you are doing that. So you know, this isn't news to you. It's about what Leslie was saying as well. And Paul it's just about taking the common sense approach to begin with. I have a personally slightly different view to Paul about that. Is I feel that this paper and other papers previously, such as the AED paper that came, just really show that there are some aspects that Chris is finding as well is of information capture that we may wish to review in the future, in a longer term, years to come type of nature, that when we look for future command and control systems, etc. How do we go about data capture whenever we go to an incident for all sorts of reasons, and then what power that would then give us for analysis and further targeting? Because as we go on, we're going to have to be very, very specific about what we do. So I think there's a bigger thing there, but I know you're already on that, so that should be something new. Shouldn't be something new, sorry. But Kathy, just back to you, just probably just as we close, if we're okay with that, is Kathy, just a little last words from you really about what do you think we could do as a general service just to improve things in the shorter term?
So quite a things we've kind of covered in terms of, like I said, we've been chasing this 70,000 figure for a number of years now, and I think that's not necessarily helpful. I think it's definitely is about quality rather than quantity. So I think, like say, a review of those targets would be useful. Like I say, I think as we move towards safe and well, we have looked again at that criteria. I think we need to understand and all be comfortable by what we mean by those most at risk of fire. And it's always this tricky thing, I think, with prevention, is we don't necessarily want just all those people at a crisis point. We need to get people downstream as well. We know we've got an aging population, people living alone in rural areas. They're just as important to get that early information and intervention work in as well. So it's making sure we capture everybody in that as well. So understanding what we really mean by fire risk is really important. I think the change in the system that we're moving towards, I think what for me is a real benefit is being able to capture that additional stuff. So yes, we can give fire safety intervention, but we're not recording at the moment how we've made a referral onto a falls team, or we've signposted you about smoking cessation because you said you've been wanting to quit for 20 years and don't know how. These are all the wider benefits that we are providing in households that at the moment our system doesn't allow us to capture. So for me, I think that's really important as well, about what are those wider benefits. And don't get me wrong, they all do relate to fire risk. Everything we do relates to fire risk. So it's all within the same thing. And I think as well, just moving forward, just that engagement with partners to make sure that the referral process is easy for them. It's easy for them to sign up. It's easy to make referrals, make it streamlined as possible. And where we can, get in fire risk integrated into their plans. So if they're doing a home assessment, is there a firebox there? So they've thought about fire, they've made an early referral. So again, just making sure we're really invested in community safety at a local level to generate all that partnership working, because that's for me is key. We can do a lot of kind of at a functional level, but it's that real local partnership work that our community action teams do that is really, really valuable to sustaining that. And then just again, on top of it, as well as the things like Make the Call campaign. So it's not just all about partners, it's also about reaching to family members as well, neighbours, etc. So when we talk about partners, I think we have to include the community in that as well. So I think we just got to be careful about what we define, like say high risk partners, etc., etc. But I think we're moving in the right direction with what we're trying to achieve with Safe and Well and the new system, and it's allowing us to kind of capture some of the learnings and the things we've discussed today. So it's just to give you that reassurance. I think we are on the right track with what we're trying to achieve and taking into cognizance the different topics today. Thanks.
Insightful comments, Kathy. Thank you very much so. Richard, really brief last few words, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just to build and support Kathy, we are looking in terms of the broader piece around the PMF about not just the reliance on home fire safety visits as our only measure of prevention within that. And Kathy and I are looking at specifically at the point she just raised about that broader partnership activity and how we then record that and use that to help guide our business, which I think is also useful. And I suppose just a slight thought, if I may, Chair, in terms of that difference of opinion between practical moving forward and research, if you like. I don't think it's an either or. I think for a service of our size, we should be absolutely pushing forward with practical business and innovation, which I think we're doing. But I also think we also need to set out our stall in terms of our approach to commissioning research that supports that business. And indeed, that is something that SLT are considering at the moment as to how we do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to both Ali and Kathy and everybody else, Chris and the team and your team, David, everybody who's been involved with this. That was 45 minutes well spent. I would like to take an action out of this that Stuart and I can have a conversation about how to look at bringing this back to the committee for further discussion, because I think it is a fantastically interesting and very relevant comment. So yeah, perhaps we can talk about that.
Absolutely. And just to, Leslie made a really good point on the board discussion in terms of this, in terms of change, and Kathy's mentioned there, changing the narrative from an outputs focused success looks like doing 70,000 visits to much more around about what's the outcome that we're looking to achieve. Yeah. To absolutely change the narrative of the organisation to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Wow. I think we are into the Complaints Annual Report. Carol, welcome. Welcome to the Service Delivery Committee. Apologies, we are running considerably late. And I look forward to your introduction to this paper, and just bear in mind, I'm sure you would, bear in mind everybody will have read through the paper. Do carry on.
Afternoon, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Carol Wade, the Information Governance Manager and Data Protection Officer for the service. So yes, I'll keep it short and sweet. It's an update generally on how we're progressing against the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman model, their new complaints handling procedure, and then our statistics for last year as well. as was just said, we've obviously provided the appendix, which goes into a great deal of detail. You can look right down to sort of a granular level of what we're reporting on, but there were some key points in this report that we kind of wanted to bring to everybody's attention. The good news is we're on target to meet what the SPSO for short are looking for. We've adopted the scheme. We did it on the 17th of December last year, and have been actually using it to mould how we move forward for this year. They're not looking for a full report until October 23, but we're a little bit ahead of the game and decided, as I say, just to adopt the same ideas. We were already reporting on most of those KPIs anyway, but we've been able to get down to a much better level of detail than we have in the past, which I'll come on to in a sec as well. So moving on to statistics themselves, you'll be able to see that there has been an increase sort of year on year since sort of 2018-19 when we were doing it. We've kind of been jumping up a bit, and I'll come on to some of the reasons we think we maybe are there later on. We're dealing with the majority of our complaints in what we call stage 1, which is frontline, which is something that the SPSO wants as well. 69% of them are being done at that stage, and we're also doing really well with our targets as far as responding well within the timescales for the stage 1, which is a 1 to 5 days, and the stage 2, which is the sort of 6 to 20 days. We are well within those timescales and are actually replying very, very quickly to them. With a number of different types of outcomes that we can have, we report on that, where we're talking about is it upheld, is it not upheld. 53% of them are not upheld, and then it's kind of a bit of a breakdown with some of the others. We're trying to get down into a bit more nitty-gritty about why, and we were focusing that very much from the 1st of April this year moving forward to get a bit more input there. There is a, I think it's Appendix 2, I think, is the one that has the full detail where you can look at it based on, is it service delivery area, is it department, the categories, the subcategories, is it not upheld, is it partially upheld, upheld. So you can really have a look at that and analyse that yourself. The analysis of the complaint is actually reviewed quarterly and given to the Information Governance Group. And then if there's any improvements that need to be made, then we're actually discussing them at those meetings on a quarterly basis. So there's always this continuous improvement in the background. As far as those that go past the investigation stage and someone is not happy and reports it to the SPSO, we only had one, and it wasn't upheld because they felt that we had responded to it appropriately as well last year. So that's always a good thing that we're keeping those numbers very low. We're sitting at 95% of our complaints are now made online, so we're going to be monitoring that one moving forward. We're taking quite a few that are even coming in on social media, but we're grabbing them and making sure that the comms team are linking in with us so that we aren't missing any in that respect. And also, we've kind of done a little bit of a breakdown on the key ones that were the ones we're getting the majority of the complaints about. So they're in the report, and you'll have obviously read some of the numbers in there. The key areas that were given us some of the issues with service delivery. It's very, very difficult at this stage to do a complete comparison because we have now actually changed how we're reporting on those. There's 29 subcategories because of the randomness of the types of complaints we get. You know, they're spread over a wide variety of areas, but we're hoping to kind of get that spot on and have something to compare to next year. We were sitting at 83 last year, of which 57 of them were actually not upheld, which is a good thing. And the more accurate detail we'll be able to provide a bit more next year. The driving was one we were quite concerned as well. There's an increase, and we've actually done some work with the training, safety and assurance team. They're getting quarterly reports, and they've gone off and actually done some work with their training packages, with the communications, with even the induction side of it to make sure they're actually capturing a lot of the areas where we can remind people of what they should be doing as far as the driving and parking and leaving the car in awkward places and what we could do about that moving forward. And they're going to be able to feed back to us. So we're doing some of the other things that SPS were expecting us to do as well, which is, you know, you said we did, or you've highlighted something and we have made improvements to that. So it'll be interesting to see now that we've got a bit more detail there how we can report on that next year as well. The on-duty conduct and also the on-duty conduct as well, to be fair, the numbers, we've got 23 on the on-duty, which was an increase from 15. And it's pretty even between the upheld and the not upheld. But when we're actually analysing them and looking at the LSO areas they're on 1 or 2 numbers over 18 locations. And we did some work with our performance data services team as well to try and look at trends and look at areas where we could show there were things that were happening across the service. but they are so random, and it's ones and twos, predominantly ones, as you'll see from the appendix, that there are actually no trends there that we're able to pick up on at this stage, but we will continue to monitor. Same with the off-duty conduct. We've dropped one, but same idea. It was ones and twos again across the 18 locations. So we will keep an eye on it and see if there's anything else we can report. And we work with Chris's team, who's also on the call, very closely on the statistics. But at the moment, there are no complete trends that show where we're actually got areas that we have got to make some significant improvements. Social media is a bit more of a good story. We've gone from 26 down to 15, which was good. Some of them have been upheld. What we have found is there was only one Twitter, the other ones are all Facebook. And what we've also found is it's not so much work orientated, it's people who are doing things in their own private lives, but they're posting things on Facebook, but they're still bringing the organisation in dispute, or it still comes under our discipline and grievance sort of policies. So therefore, if someone sends us a screenshot of something, we have to act on this. And we are improving it. We've actually been sending out a lot more messages, a lot more guidance, so that people understand that whilst they're doing it in their private accounts, it is still considered that you're bringing the organisation in dispute. And we have got that reduction, but I still think there's a bit more work we can do there. One of the other things I think just want to add to it is we have monitored that there is a change in the tone of complaints. We found the same with freedom of information requests as well, and we thought it was quite interesting to kind of, I didn't put it in the report, but just to mention, and our counterparts at Police Scotland and some of the other sort of my equivalents across other local authorities have all felt the same thing. The tone since COVID has changed drastically, a lot more demanding, a little bit more angrier in some of them, and also some of the complaints themselves are on far more minor issues that we normally would never have received complaints about. There's nothing to quantify it. No one actually has anything to say why it's changed, but it certainly has been since COVID. So that's the only kind of trend that we've seen in that sense. The benchmarking, very, very difficult to actually benchmark against anyone else. We are different, when we look at the different areas. Police Scotland managed to drop drastically in the year, but after having conversations with them, they have related that completely to COVID. The fact that the previous year their complaints had actually gone up because of COVID, but because of the 21 to 22 and things were a bit more sort of streamlined, they've said the reduction was actually because they weren't getting complaints about COVID anymore. So they've pretty much aligned it to that. And with Glasgow City Council, theirs have increased significantly over that year, but they've actually put it down to neighbourhood and community issues. And very much that tone and people being a little bit more unhappier about just generally what's going on within their communities. So that was quite interesting as well. We're using SharePoint and we're using Power BI. So we're using lists in SharePoint, which is a much better way of gathering our information. And Chris and his team have done a great job at actually providing dashboards for us, which gives us a much better way of presenting the information. And we're actually, it's the next step we're way to do is with the LSOs and DACOs and heads of function are going to be able to get access to these dashboards on a daily basis. They are updated daily and they will have information in front of them there and then where they can also compare to other areas, and we can look at information that makes sure that they are watching trends themselves and seeing if something has happened in another area and perhaps they've just had something similar, can they go and have a look and see what the outcomes were. It's completely anonymised, there's no personal data in there, so there's nothing being sort of breached in that respect, but it gives them more of a feel rather than just waiting on the quarterly reports coming. So that's quite a good thing as well. We did update the complaints area of the website in line with the guidance, and we're thinking that may be one of the reasons why we've seen an increase as well, that we've actually, rather than hiding where complaints could be made, we've made it far more sort of visible. That may be something that's contributed to the increase as well. Also, as I said, the kind of the tone and how people are feeling after COVID. But generally, when we're actually looking at the statistics, it's very, very difficult to attribute to any other particular trends. The overall number of complaints that we get as an organisation of our size is significantly low, and we are going to continue to learn and make improvements where necessary to try and reduce the numbers. But at this stage, it's very, very difficult to say that it's this one thing that we need to be able to make improvement on, or larger areas that we need to. Just at the end, just to sort of close up there, the annual report deadline for the SPSO to publish on your own website and make available to the public is October of every year, and the first one's not actually due till October 2023. But we've started this just to get a feel for it and to try and understand what we're going to be doing. We'll keep improving on it for next year, and our intention is to actually submit it to service delivery again before that we actually do then go ahead and publish it. It doesn't actually have to go to the SPSO, but they can ask for it at any time. But if you're publishing it and you're actually getting up on your website, then they can go and have a look at any time. So we'll make sure that ours is up there and is available. Very much a whistle-stop tour, but happy to take any questions.
Carol, thank you very much. And a great deal of hard work. It seemed to me that every aspect that we could possibly ask questions on has been dealt with, really. I mean, you know, you've adopted a whole new set of procedures. You've done them well within the timescales. The service is handling the complaints within the timeframes as well. It seems to be your statistical numbers are so low, it's difficult to draw conclusions. So I mean, it's a fantastically good news story. As if you could apply that to a complaints paper. But does anybody have any points to make?
Very quick point, Nick, if I might. This is a really good paper. I don't think you should worry about the increase. I think that is a societal issue and not necessarily ourselves. And thank you very much indeed for the appendix listing all the ones. That gave me a lot of pleasure reading. And it convinced me that this was not as significant as I first thought it was.
Right, okay.
Sorry. Carol, thanks. The paper's fantastic, and obviously the self-delivery, there's, in terms of complaints, it's like, you know, people are dealing with those in terms of the investigation, and Carol and our team work tremendously well with service delivery colleagues and data colleagues on that side of things. Just for context, we get far more compliments than we get complaints, but we don't legislatively, we're not required to record those in the same way. But I think Carol would agree that we get through social media and through other channels lots of compliments, and we continually tell service delivery staff to focus on the positives as well as looking at some of these which could be perceived to be negative.
Do we actually publish an annual report on compliments?
We don't at this stage, but funnily enough, it was actually discussed at our information governance group just last week that it would be actually really good for us to take the compliments and try and do something very, very similar with what we've just done with this report. So that was an action that was actually just taken away from last week's meeting. That is our intention, yes.
Good for staff morale.
Excellent, yes. Carol, thank you very much.
One finally, could I just make, it's a great paper, I'll say what everybody else did. I would like to see other benchmarks. I wouldn't benchmark myself against the police and the council. I regularly argue with both. I don't regularly argue with the fire service. So I think a benchmark against another fire service on both compliments and complaints would be really interesting.
Point made, point well made. Okay, thank you. Carol, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Carol.
Cheers. Okay.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye. That takes us on to the item 11.1, the Director at Risks, Stuart.
Okay, so I'll be as brief as possible. Just 4 changes to highlight the committee of. The first relates to risk. It says that it's been closed. I wouldn't use the terminology closed. It's been de-escalated to the functional risk register, away from the service delivery risk register, and that's in relation to the MTA arrangements. Service delivery director or contempt arrangements are in place, and hence why it's been de-escalated to the operations function. A couple have changed. SPPC 001 around about the accuracy of performance management information, and I think Chris has articulated that really well today. And SD 004, which failing to maintain a standard suite of policies, has been decreased due to the completion of associated controls. And the last one is a new risk was identified, which has come as no surprise, and that is in relation to the risk of potential industrial action. But just for comfort, that wasn't just put on in preparation for this. This has been on service delivery risk register for a few months, but it's just obviously the lag in terms of reporting to this committee as well. So, Chair, I will pause at that, and happy for myself or my colleagues to pick up any specifics on the risk register.
Anjali? No. Nothing? Leslie? No. Paul? No. Okay, Thank you. We'll have a chance to read that. Thank you very much. That's excellent. David, could I ask you to talk to the risk spotlight and the cost of living crisis? It is an important paper, without doubt. We will have read it.
Yes.
And we have talked about it already. So I'm just conscious of the time, but I also want to give the opportunity for discussion on this.
Yeah, no problem. I think, as we've kind of alluded to, we've touched this particular risk spotlight a number of times over today's meeting and the topics therein. I talked right at the start around about the umbrella nature of the term cost of living crisis, and the background kind of tries to link in the risk spotlight with where we see existing risks on risk registers across the organisation. And as you can see, we've kind of highlighted a number of areas there that we feel are kind of in scope. I'm not going to go through the paper line by line or section by section. Suffice to say that we've identified a whole range of issues that would, and to put it in the context of today's meeting, that would potentially move people from one risk category to another. And we can see how that would happen in terms of fuel poverty and work poverty and in other areas that the service is considering at all times. There is a number of things, if we go through in terms of national type issues such as power outages and blackouts, which are becoming more topical, and then internally things like the industrial action and the effect of our own budget constraints and the changes to the budget within the service, they're contained within the paper as well. I think earlier on we talked about how service delivery would look to address, adapt to, intuitively address areas around about particular challenges. And I think we even saw real life kind of examples of that through the discussions around about food banks and other things that have appeared in society. Unfortunately, our ability to intuitively kind of tap into that type of audience. Poor terminology, sorry about that. But yeah, we cover that in the actions to support communities section of the paper there. And you can see through our actions that the biggest and I suppose most effective we feel thing that we've done in recent times has been that specific session that was put on online, and it was also mentioned in the service delivery update report, which pulled in a lot of these themes that we're talking about and attempted to educate partners and others on that online forum. So we're very active in the partnerships around about the cost of living challenges and support for those. Happy to pick up on any elements that were contained therein.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Leslie.
Thanks, David. It was a very helpful paper, and particularly just looking at the scale of the number of households living in fuel and extreme fuel poverty. Two quick questions. Are we able to get a handle on how many fires are caused by things that are linked to a cost of living money pressures? And the second point is, how are we maximising use of PR and editorial media coverage to get our points across? Thank you.
Yeah, so both of those, I'll pick up the first point. I'm not convinced, or I'm not sure how we could report that specifically, albeit I am more than confident that in terms of causation factors, in terms of fire cause recorded in this recording system, we will be able to start to identify trends. So, for example, the paper goes on to talk about things that would see societal changes of behaviours. Stuart talked earlier about human behaviour, and historically what we've seen in terms of fires around about challenging times within communities. So things like bypassing electricity meters, things like lighting by candles, open flame, etc., different ways of cooking. Those will all come through the individual fire types for the incident recording system, and we'll be able to monitor those and track those. And we would do that as a matter of course anyway through service deliveries, performance management kind of meeting and the continuous improvement forum. And pulling in and linking back to the Power BI and the lifetime data that we're now seeing, that's the guidance I've given to service delivery colleagues around about how we need to monitor those elements. So I think it is just creating the linkages without categorising it as this is our cost of living fire, but we understand all the factors that could come in. We also understand the impact it may have on non-domestic business premises and other things and fires in those as well. And I probably won't elaborate on that, but there is the potential for increasing fire across communities for various reasons. I'm sorry, I forgot your second part of the question.
Can I maybe just comment on that? Just to add to that as well, you maybe noticed in the SDC highlight report, we've done a lot of work about reviewing our safeguarding arrangements. So if crews were to come across individuals either through operational activity or home safety, then they should know that, you know, if it's cost of living stuff, that the safeguarding arrangements in place to make referrals to partner agencies for support and things like that as well. So we've really matured that approach over the last wee while, and Kathy and the team have done a lot of work to review that. And just in terms of the fire investigation team are absolutely superb at identifying causation factors, both in terms of direct but societal factors. During COVID, we added an additional element to that to say, is it COVID related? But we found it really, really difficult to link things. So it'd probably be in that same category, Leslie. So they will try, but it's not as straightforward as that. So hopefully that just adds a little bit more.
That's helpful, and I guess the part of the value in having a look at the causations is giving us anecdotes that we can then use in the second part of my question, which is how are we maximising PR and editorial, i.e. free communication coverage on the risks and how to mitigate them. Thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of, obviously, the prevention and protection team have their campaigns, and with the campaign that ties in with cost of living crisis is looking at, I think there's links to some of the reference points within actions to support communities in the risk spotlight, just around about some of the materials that are being made available and becoming more prevalent on the website and on social media. We've had a huge amount of discussion in recent times around about the change in face of that type of communication and what is effective. And we were looking at our budgets just now for a number of reasons, obviously, in terms of the effectiveness of those campaigns. And we see a huge value in actually promoting some of the cheaper or free methods, which is the kind of social media element, and maybe less towards the more expensive television type thing, because we're finding that that's maybe not as effective as it used to be.
Okay, thanks Leslie, and thanks David and Angelina.
Thank you. So good, interesting paper, and depressingly, I think the link between this paper and the Home Fire Safety Visit paper is pretty striking, isn't it? But it's a small point. Well, maybe not so small, I don't know. It mentions already here that housing associations are, a relevant sector for us. But I'm very struck by the fact that a lot of these problems are hitting households that will predominantly live in the social rented sector. So I think my point is, whatever level of and strength of relationships we have with the social housing sector up to now, making them even stronger would not go wrong, because that through that landlord function, those partners have pretty deep insights into who's really struggling, up to and including using their communication channels to the immediately preceding point there, because they're in touch the whole time, trying to manage the lives of some of those vulnerable people. So that was
okay.
Nick, can I just come in briefly on the back of that? And I know that on the back of the damp and mould problems, most recently highlighted by the death of the 2-year-old, social landlords are making sure that they are getting access to every single one of their houses on at least an annual basis. And the point that was made earlier in relation to home fire safety visits, if we can get the fire risk part of that checklist, then that could help enormously, potentially, perhaps.
Absolutely, and we can evidence that as well, that it's effective, because we've seconded for a number of years an individual to the Wheatley Group, which is, as you know, is the largest social landlord. So we know the benefits, we know that it's effective. Clearly we can't do that with every housing association, but we have other mechanisms to support them. But it's a superb way of doing it, and as I say, the impact of the Wheatley Group stuff is incredible, so it's a really good point.
I'm keen to draw this to very quickly.
Yeah, we continue to try new and innovative ways of reaching out to communities, and just I'm going to highlight to you one thing that we're doing just now, which is Cuppa with a Crew. And we're opening up fire stations mainly in remote rural areas and inviting people into a warm environment for a cup of coffee and a biscuit and a chat, and hopefully we might be able to recruit some people out of the back of that as well.
Excellent. That was a nice happy note to finish on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Intentions to move on now, and it was a good paper. Thank you very much. Timely as well. Item 13.1, the forward plan. Again, Stuart and I, it's not an action, but Stuart and I intend to talk about some topics that we may wish to bring up onto the forward plan moving forward. So we'll be doing that. Items for consideration at the future IGF board, strategy, information days, development days, etc. We just touched on UFAS before, and home fire safety visits. Again, I won't necessarily be formally saying to the chair of the board that the service delivery committee, wished to bring this up, but that you say there's a paper going up that way for UFAS, wasn't it? Yes, so that's fine. So that's that. Thank you. Review of actions, being a solitary action in that.
Yeah, just the one where you said that in relation to home fire safety visits for yourself and Deputy Chief Officer to look at how to bring it back to the Service Delivery Committee in future for further discussion.
No, that's marvellous. Thank you very much. Date of the next meeting is next year, 28th of February at, location to be decided, but it may not be here. So please keep alert for that. And that concludes the public part of the Service Delivery Committee meeting. Thank you very much.